Morning, everyone. Welcome back. Can you believe this is our last day for this workshop, this very intensive workshop that we had this week, where we went quite deep into the troubles, the hardships, the terror that our traumatized kids are experiencing, and also what can we do to help them. Okay, so I'm gonna start off by finishing the last part of the support to traumatized learners, the presentation, and then we're going to start with the ethical part. You, especially those if you are registered at HPCSA, also receive ethical points for this presentation. So the last part here is just some tips for making transitions easier. Some of this I've already referred to. For example, don't change the structure in the classroom for extended periods of time, as it will destabilize the child again. And that might be, the difficult part is that if teachers are not equipped to understand the total different needs of a traumatized child. They might easily change the structure without even considering that. And then if the child acts out on that, the child will get the time out of the punishment, and they will not necessarily understand where does that come from. Okay, so then I think we all know how distressed these kids can become when they have to go away from home, for example, on a school camp, to such an extent. I once had a teenager, I think it's grade 9, that they have to go in this school camp where they go during the week. And she just wasn't ready to separate from, from the parents because of a lack of proper object constancy, I think. But like everyone was forcing her, please go, that's going to be good for you, and lots of stuff. And in the end, the only thing, and she only told me much later, but the only way in which she could get out of that is she literally hit her hand so hard against the wall that she broke some bones there. And then she said to the parents that she has fall. And I mean, the hand was injured and she had to go, to hospital, to the doctor, but then there was an excuse for her not to go. Whereas, like I said, sometimes we can make it a plan that the parent is still close available. Or, lots of times with these type of camps, there's also these things, no cell phones allowed. Children are not allowed to, contact anyone outside. Now, I understand in terms of our kids that are non-traumatized, that teachers don't want the kids to be on their cell phones all the time. I absolutely understand that. But for our traumatized kids, that might be a situation of life and death. Now, to be able to check in, just to check in with a caregiving, a person where they feel safe with, especially when the separation anxiety symptoms appear. Yeah, so many times I have to write a special letter and tell and explain why this is necessary and stuff like that. But I still feel like our teachers are not, enough informed and sometimes even willing to understand this. Now, okay, reluctant to go out and play during breaks. So I've also discussed that some children, when they come and see me, they tell me that they don't go out during breaks, but we must meet them at the level that they can tolerate. So that is where, again, we need a trauma-informed teacher, assistant, or someone that can either go with the child, negotiate with the child. Where are you ready to go to? Maybe that I will be close by to watch that you're okay, because we want the child eventually to go back into normal interaction with the other kids. But remember all the work that we have done in terms of the fact that the child, doesn't feel safe, the fact that they have social awkward behavior, the fact that other kids tend to pick on them and bully them and make comments on their awkward behavior. All of that also play a role in that. All right. I mean, you've seen many clips around greet every learner when they enter the classroom, call them by their name. There's quite a thing about that now. Lead them in some deep breathing. Lots of different deep breathing exercises are very good and must be implemented as part of being in the class. Now, for all kids, I think really it's a prerequisite. It's not just something that we must consider. Now, what about starting the day with that? What about just helping all kids to relax and come into a stage of social engagement? For example, ritual. Remember, we talked about a rhythmic, repetitive, sensory motor, ritualistic events that help with brainstem regulation. Sing a song for younger kids every time before the bell rings, and remind them verbally how important they are to you. Right, for the classroom, reduce the sensory overload. There might be a startle response at loud noises. They might find the texture of food challenging. You know about sensory integration stuff. The teacher can try out different kind of music. You do sometimes in my practice, I get children that will tell me, can you please switch off the light? Or if I play music, there's also kids sometimes that get highly irritated by that. So also to talk to the, like to listen to what they can accommodate. But obviously in a classroom, you have a group of kids, but try out different background music and see what happens. Certain smells, alcohol, cigarettes, or in the bathroom can evoke emotional reactions. Touch, a very sensitive issue. We've talked about that, although they also need touch to develop safe attachment, and that is the contradiction now. Also provide assistance to decrease the sense of overwhelm during transitions. We've talked about transitions, and in your resources, your annexures, there is also one annexure that is about transition cards and how to make transitions easier. Transitions is a big thing. It's a very difficult thing for traumatized kids. Okay, so do not leave them without adult supervision during recess. Give, for example, a smaller area to play in, give an option to stay in the library, or help them to settle in a specific play activity, for example, jumping rope. I wonder in what way this is happening, because very frequently when there are incidents at school and preschool that I and most probably you get to do with, it is something happened on the school ground, playground, and then my question always is, okay, where was the supervision? So in fact, now, I mean, like, we can't leave traumatized kids without adult supervision when they play outside. And that's where most of the bullying also takes place. Consistent behavior from a caring adult will assist the child's brain to begin to build new circuits and establish new procedural memories. And I think that's the crux of what we've talked about the whole week, that neuroplasticity. Some of the traumatized kids might have been exposed to too much movement or too little sensory experience. They might have been left for an extended period of time without being picked up or pushed, pulled, or shaken when they were young. And this morning I had a little bit of extra time before we start, so I read a bit about read some of Alan Shaw's work. Referred to him earlier this week. I think he's one of the big names in terms of the effect of early attachment and what they do to kids in terms of research. But where, again, I just noticed that it's in most of the feeling safe, not safe attachment issues really happen in the first 2 years, and really is constellated in terms of the safety of the primary attachment figure and what happens if the attachment figure is not available. So and the long-term effect that have on children's capacity to regulate emotionally. Stuff like wobbly chairs or uneven floors or playground equipment or rough and tumble play, all of that might be triggers for the child. For caregivers, provide age-appropriate transitional objects. Don't shame the child, even the high school child, the adolescents, for needing that. for parents now, give exaggerated reminders. So like, see you soon, like, but absolutely a joy. I'm looking forward to see you after school. Now, because it comes back to that thing of held in mind that I've discussed. It's never too late to help these kids. We never lose hope. A lot of empathy when the child is dysregulated and how distressing it might feel, and reflect that to them. Of course, it's again that word of course, given the background, of course, because of what happened, if the child's old enough to say that, this might be very scary to you. That is absolutely makes sense. Of course, this would be the only way that you can look after yourself. For parents, this is a very interesting one. I don't know if you've ever had to do with this, but I once had a boy had severe separation anxiety. He also didn't separate well from the mum between age 2 and 4 to turn a bit towards the dad for the proper gender identification. The dad was working outside of the city, so he was just not available. And I think because the child also had higher levels of anxiety and needed the mother more, that also troubled that developmental aspect that need to happen. And I don't know, often you get, even when I get parents in, dads might feel abandoned because they might have a child, specifically a boy, that just don't want to have anything to do with the dad. The dad really tried to get involved and help the child and build an attachment, but child, especially when distressed, only want the mom. Anyway, the mother of this boy for many years didn't work. I've seen the boy for his separation anxiety, and he was one of those boys that really got nauseous, like of anxiety. He would vomit when he had to separate. So he was put on medication for anxiety. And then when he was about grade 4, the mother got a part-time job as a nurse, where she would just work in the mornings after she dropped the children at school and before the school closes. So, I mean, there would be absolutely no difference in terms of the children's caregiving. And the boy, just the mere fact of that, my mom's not going to be, I don't know where my mom is. Now, that fact, my object that I still need because I don't have proper object constancy, is now not going to be, in my perspective, at home doing this. I don't know where she's going to be. Absolutely destabilizes a child from scratch. And then add on to that the fact that she now suddenly wear a nurse's uniform. So even the thing of not having the same clothes on in the morning and the afternoon can destabilize these kids now. So that's something, again, that parents would not necessarily consider if we don't tell them. Okay, for parents, tell them how much you've missed them while they were in school, but not in a way that they have to comfort you, but in a joyful way. I thought about you and I missed you, and I missed your hugs, I missed your laugh, and I missed to talk to you. That helped with the development of object permanence, and that's the whole thing of being held in mind. Offer a quick run in the park rather than ask how their day was. That is immediately after school. I think we all know that kids are in general quite overstimulated, overwhelmed, fed up sometimes when they're fetched at school, and they don't necessarily immediately want to talk about that. No, they want to talk about that. They will talk about that mostly in the evening before they go to sleep. That's a good time for the parents to stay or lie down with the child. And suddenly they will just tell you what happened during the day, also almost to complete that before they fall asleep. So to go and do something physical, it's much better than to force them to talk about something that they are not ready for. Especially that with these kids, and that's why we also, it's good for caregivers of, specifically substitute caregivers of very traumatized kids. You never know when you drop the child at school in the morning how that child's going to be in the afternoon, because something happened during the day that triggered the hell out of that child. And I mean, the child might have been well regulated in the morning when he or she is dropped, and at afternoon, child might be in a totally immobilized state, refuse to talk to you, totally shut down, cut off, or in a fight or flight or freeze mode. So for caregivers to kind of try to take a nurture break before they have to fetch the child at school, so that they have that extra energy available to deal with whatever come up. Okay. Okay, use a calendar with family photos, because that can also help help the child feel now that you keep them in mind. Then also, parents can provide a transitional object at bedtime, for example, photos or recorded messages that, like a voice note, if a child has a cell phone. Or years ago, I was in London, England, and in Hamleys. I've never seen that again, but they had that builder teddy, you know, that teddy bears. They had a little thingy that you can record a message for your child or for anyone, and then they put it in the teddy bear. And then when you push on the tummy of the teddy bear, the mothers or whoever recorded the message, that message came out. And how lovely was that? Now, so child could press and hear the voice of the mother. Promise to return after a few minutes, specifically if children really struggle to sleep alone. Now, some of these kids, you can't even leave the room before they sleep. Some of them can't sleep in their own room. Sleep is a big, difficult thing with traumatized kids, very frequently. And what is important is also in our work as therapists to check on how are you sleeping. And so use the family photos as a screensaver. I've said that. Send a text or photos if a child might have access to their cell phone, or even these watches that can also receive messages. I'm thinking of you, how was your test? Something like that. And I've already said about the photographs in the workplace. Yeah, that builder teddy. Now, generally say about that. You know, I was so impressed. Now, that's many years back. I'm talking about, I was attending conference, I think it was in 2004, 20 years back. But I remember that time, I came back and I thought, I want to import these little thingies on which you can record the messages, because I thought it was amazing. And then there was this Builder Bear. We have that, I don't know if it still exists in like Hamleys or some toy stores, but I've never seen that thingy that you can record a message on. All right, and when to refer for professional help. I think all of you know this now. I'm not going to really focus on that, but obviously signs of untreated depression or anxiety, for example, hypochondrial symptoms, a lack of concentration, extreme lack of energy, tiredness, lack of interest in social interaction. So we must not miss out on signs of depression in kids. Lack of appetite, drawings about dying or death, or verbalizing a wish to die, extreme meltdowns in the classroom, extreme regressive behavior, where a child suddenly needs a transitional object again, enuresis, encopresis, aggressive behavior, extreme separation anxiety, a lack of cognitive progress, and then the referral to the necessary therapist. So it happens many times in my supervision sessions that, you know, like I still have to remind therapists that have you screened for signs of PTSD and you know, and depression and anxiety disorder. So we must really, that's something that I really try to do with these kids in my first session, especially the extremely, you know, traumatized kids. Now, because yeah, it's so frequently part of their inner self now, and part of their life, and like I said earlier this week, they don't necessarily know that they are supposed to feel different, but I mean, because of the risk also of trying to commit self-death and stuff like that. All right, now we are shifting gears, although the work that we're going to do is very much in the same, like we're just going to look at specific issues, but it is adding on to the work that we have done. So the first thing that I want to talk here about is understanding secrets and abuse in terms of the ethics. So the most well-known symptom of child abuse is that children maintain the secret of child abuse for extended periods of time prior to revealing that to an adult. Now, I don't know if you know, um, what happens is that, or research say that it takes about 5 years in general before a child discloses about specifically sexual abuse. I was shocked when I heard this. I thought, how is it possible that that can happen? But yeah, it just happens. And all of what we're gonna, I almost want to say, going to discuss here, also in terms of child sexual accommodation, syndrome, child sexual abuse accommodation syndrome, that is part of adding to that. So in lots of the cases, the child has lived a majority, if not their whole life, keeping multiple secrets concerning the abuse and family dysfunction. And then Dr. D. Rowland's Summit developed a descriptor of sexual abuse symptoms in children, which he called child sexual abuse accommodation syndrome. So the descriptors of this could just as well apply to other abuses. What is a part of this syndrome? Secrecy about the abuse, reluctance to speak about it due to possible threats by the perpetrator, emotional helplessness to resist or complain about the original abuse, or subsequent re-victimization by other perpetrators. Now, so the helplessness, I think, as it is in any abuse, and I said that yesterday also when we talked about ego strength, is that ego strength go down and down and down. And the less ego strength, the less a child is going to speak up. And also the fact that often there are abuse that come from several places. So there's re-victimization, entrapment and accommodation, in that the child feels that there's no way to escape the abuse. Now, so that's the other thing. I think the threats that go with that. So one grandpa that was abusing his his grandchild, said to the child that if you tell anyone, then grandma will die. And in the end of the long time when he did disclose, soon after that, the grandma did die. And you can just imagine what now the guilt was there. So it's so complex now how that happened. But I think one thing is also that, so there was a case, I was also doing supervision where the child, the child started having behavioral problems at school. It was a teenager. Oh, he was about 12, I think. And then the principal called in the parents and said the child needs therapy. And then suddenly they just took the child out of school and say they're going to start homeschooling. But they did allow a therapist that had to do practical for studies to see the child. So she collected the child from the home and do therapy with the child and took the child back to the home. And it was about the first time that she saw the child. He said to her, every night when I go to sleep, somewhere during the night, a ghost come to my room. And the ghost hurt me, and then the ghost leave again, just that. And maybe one day I will tell you who the ghost is. Okay, so that happened. And then what happened was he, like she was very concerned about that. So in the next session, she did what we do, trauma-focused play, where she had, as part of her practice, children could pick for themselves out of a range of teddy bears, a teddy bear that they can get as a transitional object. So she said she had two anatomically correct dolls, and she put them quite close on a table, and she said to the child, you can pick for yourself a teddy bear, but before you can get the teddy bear, you must tell the teddy bear what the ghost is doing. And so she didn't say anything about the anatomically correct dolls that were lying there, but the child then took the teddy bear and moved to the male doll and start moving the penis up and down and show what the ghost is doing. So then she was so far, and in the meantime, the mother, it was a stepfather, the mother started having resistance that the child keep on going for therapy. What I didn't say, the boy said also to her in the first session, my mum said I must tell no one about the ghost, because otherwise we won't have food and a place to stay. So she was aware of the sexual abuse that was happening. And then one day, when the therapist, soon after that, when she took the child back to the home after the session, she met a small town. She met the stepdad there, and 12 o'clock, and she said, "Are you home early from work?" And he said, "Yes, I'm going fishing this weekend." And okay, the situation was handled. But I mean, like, often there's also this thing of even a threat from a dependent type of often the mothers that don't tell anyone. And I mean, obviously they are just as guilty. Delayed, conflicted, and unconvincing disclosure of the abuse. So this disclosure may seem exaggerated, inconsistent in detail, or vague. Now, especially that's also what's happening now. So it's they just say one little thing and then refuse to talk about it anymore, or it seems conflicted or delayed. Or the child might backpedal or recant the allegation to restore the family structure, or to emotionally calm or take care of a parent, a family member, or the perpetrator. So there was a child, she was about 4 years old, and she also started with behavioral problems at the preschool. The school called the parents in and said the child needs therapy. The child went for therapy, and it was one of those cases where the parents were quite reluctant to take the child. It's one of those the school keep on forcing, because child really have trouble at school. And then in the very first session with the psychologist, the child played out very vivid scenes of sexual abuse. So the therapist had to call the parents in, and she had to complete the Form 22 and take that to the police service and social development. And the child was referred to a forensic social worker, and she played out the same thing. There was very clear evidence of what happened. So then she was removed from the parents' home and put into foster care with a family member of the mother. So now there was a criminal case opened, and also a child court case, according to the Children's Act, because she was in foster care. So the mother was still allowed to visit her. The dad was not allowed to obviously have contact with her in that time. And the mom came and visit her, and definitely the mom must have accused her and said to her, you are, I almost want to say, why did you lie? Why did you tell this? And threatened her. And soon after the mom left, when the child then saw the forensic professionals again, she just kept on saying, "I lied, it didn't happen, it was very naughty of me." And she shut down, and she just from then on, she just backpedaled, and they could get nothing out of her. In the end, if I'm right, the case was thrown out of court, but the child I think she still stayed in foster care for quite a while, and they needed to be some therapy and stuff, but difficult issues. So it is very rare that children with post-traumatic stress disorder who has been removed from parental home has revealed all of the history of the abuse that they have experienced to the social worker, other professional, or child protection worker. Also because of gaps in memory, and some of these stored in implicit memory, often, and then because of their own protection and their defenses. Now, often they reveal just enough to buy them temporary relief from the abuse. Young children do not understand that the core decision based on limited revelation and recommendation of the child protection agency may be very quick and based on return to home goal. Now, yesterday I briefly referred to the family preservation bias, and many, many times, I can tell you many stories. I don't work with the forensic part of it, but I sometimes see the child for the therapy part after the abuse. So there was another child in foster care that also had very vivid revelations of sexual abuse. Again, she was removed, put in foster care. And she was sent to me for therapy. And in the therapy, there was clear signs of trauma and of being harassed, and of this dark figure that she put in the sand tray, this monster figure, and what he's doing and how she would take, for example, a 5-point starfish. Now, the 5-point starfish is a self symbol. It's a symbol of human wholeness. So it's a symbol of your true self. And how this dark monster figure would threaten and like really try to destroy the 5-point starfish. And as we went on, she got better. Again, the case was thrown out of court because not enough evidence. I don't know why. And then the next thing, the court ordered bonding therapy. And I mean, this child, I want to see the dad, but she just have no choice whatsoever. And as it so typically is with narcissistic parents, now that the dad went to court and say, okay, but the case was thrown out. I want contact with my child. So there are no reason now for you to refuse me to have contact with my child. And what happened then is that the child, the dad was, the court said now bonding therapy, and I normally refuse. I don't do the bonding therapy in these cases, because if a child don't want to see a parent and I'm the therapist, and I now become the therapist that have to reinstall and work on bonding therapy, where will that put the trust of the child in me? They will see me as part of this. So they have to appoint a different a social worker for that. But the dad would often not pitch up for the bonding therapy now, and in the presence of the social worker. I mean, he would come, then he wouldn't appear, then he would come. So he would only want to have contact with the child if it serves his needs for narcissistic supply. If it doesn't serve his needs, he didn't care. So yeah, I don't need to say anything more. So yeah, if the child protection agency does not have the full history, the child might be returned to home very quickly. And sometimes when the threat of returning to home becomes evident, the child might decide to reveal another part of the abusive history, hoping that that might keep them out of the perpetrator zone. There's also the possible reality of an unconscious or unspoken contract between the child and the biological family or the perpetrator, that if specific details are revealed, the child might be harmed by the perpetrator, a loved one or a pet might be harmed, or the child might never have contact with a non-perpetrating family member again. Terrible. It's just horrible. Nah, and yeah, so many times these cases, some of these cases that are thrown out of court or take 4, 5, 6 years. I was involved in a case of child abuse with a teenager that was, I thought it's the most horrible that I've ever heard about. The stepdad literally gave her a so-called vitamin drink in the evening, which was, he spiked her, and then she was so fast asleep that then he harassed her, and I don't know if he raped her or what, but she started getting nightmares about it. That court case went on. The child was admitted in psychiatric hospital, extreme trauma, lots of horror stories. And then it was now a few weeks back that at last the stepdad was sentenced to jail for 5 years. But I mean, after an enormous long time and lots of court appearances also. Okay. Wilhelmine asks, where can we read more about bonding therapy? The most common or most well-known therapeutic modality for bonding therapy is TheraPlay. So you can look into any TheraPlay books and TheraPlay videos that are available on YouTube. It's clear that these kids carry with them some very heavy baggage, and then very young kids under the age of 5 who have been abused all their life are not so much keeping a secret as they simply fail to tell what is common and mundane for them. They grow up with that. That's all they know. And when for example, sexual abuse started when they were 3 years old, that thing of leaving their body. Now, in order to I almost want to say, survive it. Now, so to totally dissociate. A young child might not have enough life experience to have noticed the fact that not all families work like that. Like I said earlier this week, it's often only when they become teenagers that they understand this better. Sometimes children will clearly state that they have a secret that they cannot tell, and might at times state who told them to keep the secret. So like this story about the child who told about the ghost. Sometimes this contributes to professionals becoming noticeably tense and anxious, and that can even begin to press the child for details. And now, as it is with traumatized children, the child can begin to to experience this pressure verbally and non-verbally. The professional might experience anger at the perpetrator, fear for the child, or just natural excitement of hitting upon a clear and important aspect in the child's treatment. Unfortunately, the child can feel the shift in the helper's countenance, and this might set off alarm bells for the child, which in turn shut the child down and take the child to the state of immobilization. So if there was a possibility that the child made the I have a secret statement as a way to reveal, a helper's reactivity can cause a child to change his or her mind. So that's very important. Another reason why a child will make the I have a secret statement is that they hope that this will be enough to protect them. Now, every night when I go to bed, a ghost come and hurt me. Maybe one day I will tell you about the ghost. Sometimes children can continue to use this statement to keep on receiving intense attention from an adult. And in families that have many secrets, which is a typical symptom of dysfunctional families, the child might be so used to that lifestyle that even insignificant things might be presented as a secret. Yeah, like I've said earlier, children that come from traumatized homes just implicitly and explicitly learn that certain things there are secret, because often these systems are very rigid and closed off. In other words, just the fact that the child say they have a secret might not necessarily refer to abuse. Right, how to handle the I have a secret statement in an ethical way to, like in terms of the child's emotional well-being. Be mindful of your voice tone, your body language, and the content of responses to the child's statement. It is not easy to keep a calm approach in this situation. Even if we have been through this many times, it might still feel for us overwhelming. There are therapists that choose to specialize in this work, but I mean, a child can also reveal to anyone at any time something about a secret, not necessarily if you choose or not. When a child comes to you for therapy, you don't know what they're going to tell you. The trick is to have been giving the child your best professional attention up to this point, and then give the secret statement the same level of attending. This will help to alleviate any obvious shift in your attention, intensity, and emotion. So it doesn't mean that we should express no emotion. Curiosity about the secret is appropriate, as well as demonstrating concern that it might be troubling to the child. There are two ideas that we have to convey to the child, namely, there are two kinds of secrets, good secrets, like, for example, a birthday party that you keep, like that you organize for a friend or someone, that's a secret, and bad secrets, like someone hurting a child. And secondly, there's a need to convey to the child that if they have a bad secret, you cannot help them if they do not tell you what the secret is. They can still decide when they want to tell that to you, but that's the basic. Okay, George is age 5 and playing on the floor of the foster home with action figures. He begins to bang 2 action figures together in an aggressive fashion and shouts, "You bitch, get off of me right now or I'm gonna pop you." The therapist is startled by the language from such a young child and states, "Wow, they are angry at each other." George responds, "They are mad at each other and want to fight." The therapist asks if George had ever seen two people that's angry at each other and want to fight before. George nods his head yes, and then states, "I have a secret." The therapist begins to attend to George closer, shifting to more consistent eye contact. "Lean a bit forward." "What is your secret?" she asks. "I cannot tell," says George. Therapists do not allow any time between George's statement and her response. So now the therapist is also not in the social engagement system anymore. "You need to tell me if someone has hurt you. Who hurt you? What did they do?" So remember, we talked about, well, the thing of people who are anxious is start to talk more fast. And remember, we also said we need to be careful for extensive questions with traumatized kids, and especially posing questions. The child doesn't have even opportunity to answer the first question before we ask the second and the third. No. George visibly changed from a relatively open posture to one that is much more closed. He pulls his action figures into his lap and looks down on the floor. His facial expression becomes flat. Therapist sense that he is onto something important and states, "If something has happened to you, you need to tell me right now." George looks up but does not give eye contact. He states, "Nobody hurts me. Can I get my snack now?" Okay, so you can see what happened there. Now, George was just not ready, and the therapist, with her way of intrusive questioning and moving closer and asking lots of questions in one sentence and all of that, made George close down and increasing his anxiety. Right, here's another case study. Laura, age 7. Therapist has been trying to help Laura to work through emotions surrounding her removal from home due to alleged neglect issues. The mother has been arrested for drug possession, and there are suspicions that the mother was prostituting for money. While playing with dolls, Laura began to simulate sex acts between the dolls. Therapist asks in a calm and curious manner what the dolls are doing. Laura just shrugs and asks if she can tell the therapist a secret. Therapist responds quickly and with a constricted voice, tell Laura that she can tell her anything, anything. Laura leans forward and whispers in the therapist's ear in classic secret motion, "I got my sister a doll just like this one for her birthday next week." Feeling slightly let down, the therapist's posture slumps and she states flatly, "Oh, that's a nice gift." Now, because I do a lot of supervision, sometimes therapists will say to me in a supervision session, doesn't matter what it's about, they say, "The child did this or that, or I did this technique and the child did that, and I was so disappointed." And one therapist once said to me, "This play therapy doesn't work because I did this technique and the child didn't do that." So, and then I really strictly have to help them to remember that in therapy, we can have goals, but we cannot have expectations. The moment that we have expectations, it's about us and not about the child anymore. It's something in us that wants to feel good or better or feel that we are efficient or something with our performance. If we have any expectation of what should happen. So that's the first thing. And then if you are disappointed because the child didn't give you the answer that you expect, now that's something to really go deep into, because normally we are disappointed because we have an expectation. And then we have some work to do on ourselves now in terms of, this is not about me. This is not about me and my needs. This is about a child that have certain needs at a certain place, that feel a certain level of safety, that isn't a certain level of ego strength. And sometimes whatever the child tells me might be something normal, like I got my sister a doll. Okay. David, age 7, another case study. David was removed from his mother's care with a younger sibling because of neglect. There is a suspicion by the treatment team that David had been sexually abused by the mother's boyfriend, who is not living with the mother any longer. David consistently demonstrates sexualized behavior in the foster homes. I mean, like, all of these are things that make us think most probably there are something cooking. He'd recently pulled down his pants in front of another child and allegedly said to the other child, "Suck it." The therapist is hoping to address this behavior with David, who has been sent to his room by the foster parents following this incident. After greetings, the therapist tells David in a gentle but firm way that the foster parents have told him what had happened last night. David, who usually has a bright affect, flattens and hangs his head. The therapist, again with a gentle and firm voice, tells David that he is not in trouble with her, but she wants to help David. She invites David to tell what happened in his own words. David says, still with his head down, "Yes, I did. I asked the child's name to suck me." Therapist pauses, allowing the statement to settle and give David time to continue. David remains silent and just glances at the therapist. "I wonder why you said that and pulled your pants down," said the therapist in a low, even tone. There's another long pause. David says quietly as he begins to cry, "I have a secret I cannot tell." That kind of secret is difficult. Then the therapist pauses again. David repeats that he cannot tell. Therapists state, "Well, you do not have to tell me, but it sounds that you might feel better if you did." David states, almost if he has memorized the line, "If I tell, I will get hurt." Therapists do not push the process, simply reflects both the content and the emotion. Telling this bad secret might mean that someone you care about gets hurt, and that scares you. A long pause, and the therapist hands a tissue to David. Therapist states quietly to David that she wants to help him, but the secret might be standing in the way of it. The silence continues. David picks up a crayon and begins to color the opposite page. He begins to chat about the upcoming school year. It's clear to the therapist that David is finished talking about the secret for now. That is okay. The clinician understands the wisdom of being patient, firm, and gentle in this situation. The session was still very significant because it was the first time that David hinted at the fact that he had possibly been sexually abused by the mother's boyfriend. And very important, while children can be very resilient, they experience small increments of therapeutic intensity surrounding the secret of the abuse as very intense, much more than we can calculate. Sure, I cannot emphasize this enough, and I think the best possibility for us as therapists and adults to understand this if we had been in a similar situation, because not necessarily about abuse, but you have to tell something that is very painful and very shameful and very scary to someone else, and you're not sure if they are going to believe you, and will they believe you, and how are they going to react, and will it still be safe, and how are they going to look at you afterwards? That's why like often after the persona come down. So Carl Jung said, you remember now the house drawing, for the structure of the psyche, the roof, that's the persona or the mask, is that one of the first things that need to happen in therapy is for the persona to come down. But once the mask, because Carl Jung also says every client have a secret, and that is now adults and children. Not a lot of clients. You do get your clients that have severe attachment disorders and have absolutely no filters and they'll blurt everything out. We do get that. But sometimes in that blurting out, there also now might be confabulation and lies. I mean, you do get children, adults sometimes with borderline traits and so that also have learned to make up things to get that, to force adults to have that, give them the necessary attention or mothering, whatever need they try to satisfy. I mean, that's also true. But in general, normally when the persona comes down and we start almost kind of testing, now if a child say, I have a secret, is already a very anxiety-provoking thing. And at the main thing that I want to affirm here and emphasize here is that the child is testing consciously or unconsciously, is this safe? Is it safe with you? How are you going to handle it? Are you going to are you going to be safe enough so that next time I can get down a bit more of my guard and reveal a bit more? Okay, so Kylie asked, if you suspect abuse, the child has not disclosed directly, should you refer for home intervention at the risk of damaging the therapeutic relationship? If I think back about obviously by law, now there's certain things that you need to do by law in terms of completing a Form 22. And also, if I think back about the child with the ghost issue, the therapist didn't immediately, after the child said every night there's a ghost that come and hurt me. I mean, it was very vague information. She didn't then refer immediately and completed a Form 22 and asked for a legal investigation and that, or like a social worker to intervene. But when the child show what's happening with the anatomic doll, so in terms of ethical legal stuff now, on the one hand, what I'm trying to talk about here is not specifically the legal stuff, but more like how do we handle this stuff in an ethical way with kids. But yes, if we have to take it further, if there's enough information, then we have to explain to the child that we have to do this is by law. The reason for that is to make sure that the child's protected, and that whole thing of I will not allow you to get hurt anymore. In the little bit that I've worked with that, I've never had a child, once they are brave enough to tell enough, that even if we're going to talk about suicidality also as an ethical legal matter, but even if it's about suicidality and I have to put the child on suicide watch, and I have to I tell the child in this session, I have to call in your parent now, and we need maybe to organize an emergent admittance at the psychiatric hospital now. Or there need to be an emergency removal or whatever. The child need to go and stay somewhere else. I've never had a child that when it gets to that point that protest against that, or that are angry towards me or stuff like that. In most of the cases, there's something deep inside of the child that wants help. There's something deep inside of the child that once they get to the point of revealing that, I mean, it takes maybe so long and so much courage to do that, that they might voice concerns, like the child that I mentioned yesterday about but I'm smoking and will I be able to smoke there? Or whatever the case. Now, but there might be concerns, there might be anxieties, there might be anxiety around what is the perpetrator going to do, that we can handle. But I've never had that they were angry towards me or that it hampered the relationship. Okay, let me just see here. Kaylee says, if I had a client who also referred to a big black ghost who used to come, and that's the father, but she never disclosed directly because of coaching by the mother. In the end, the child was placed back with the parents by the court, even though we kept trying. Yeah, it's interesting that the metaphor of the ghost. Now, so it's kind of, it's a person, but it's also not a person. Now, there's almost some extra, if it's an evil ghost, extra kind of power. Now, because we know that a ghost is not a human being now, and it's something that can really be scary. That's horrible, Kylie. Yeah, I think there are such a lot of dilemmas around that. Okay, Wilhelmine says, in the case of a traumatized teenagers, what is your experience in terms of disclosure? Since I might have the words to describe, but not emotionally ready to discuss, can it also take several sessions to disclose? Okay, I want to say again that I don't have a lot of experience in this because if I get an intake request where there's a suspicion of abuse, I refer it even before I see the child. I don't take these cases in as a general rule because I will just anyway have to refer now. But if I see a child and the child's my client over a long period of time, and then suddenly, in between the therapy sessions, after session 10, the child start to do these things. It's I find that if they have decided that they trust me and that it's safe, and remember we talked a lot about that thing of how do kids decide that it's safe, and how long does it take for traumatized kids to decide that? It's interesting. Now, I had two cases now of a professional person that I had to work with on a team. So in this case, it's a psychiatrist, and both of my clients, well, they end with the same psychiatrist as an emergency intake, and both of the children separately from each other told me during sessions they don't like the psychiatrist. They don't, okay, then like that's difficult because, I mean, professionally, legally or ethically, I can't discuss another professional or, but I do give them the opportunity. I just reflect and say, so you don't feel this doctor is the right fit for you. No. And sometimes they would say because of this or that. No, but the biggest reason is that thing that I said yesterday of teaching, preaching, and moralizing. And it's interesting now. So, yeah, every situation is unique. It will depend on a lot of issues in terms of the threats that the child gets, the safety at home, the fear that they might be removed. I've seen a children's home child that was a teenager that was removed and put into a children's home after she disclosed sexual abuse. And also, she had a lot of accusations that came to her from the rest of the family. You broke up the family. What if your father goes to jail? No one's going to take care of us. And I remember when I did the rose bush projection with her, initially, she had all these black roses that are falling from the rose bush and they are dying. Yeah, so it's horrible, the secondary abuse. Now, okay, now the child has disclosed that, but if the non-perpetrators or family members that still have contact with the child, even if it's just telephonic at the children's home, accuse the child, persecute the child, like guilt and obligation on the child, and which is actually called blackmail. Now, blackmail the child for speaking up, or breaking contact with the child, just totally abandon the child. While children can be very resilient, they experience small increments of therapeutic intensity surrounding the secret. Okay, we've talked about that. So a press for movement is normally counterproductive in abuse cases. We have to stick with the child's pace. Yeah, if the child is normally, according to my knowledge, if the child is referred for forensic assessment, the forensic social worker or psychologists have a different way of working, and their focus is on getting the info out so that the court case, or having a report, having, being able to write a report and to get the child safe. But I'm talking more from a therapy perspective in terms of, like, what is the right way? On the one hand, the child needs to be safe, but what do you do if the child just shut down? Then you don't have enough evidence. I had a case of a child that the brother of 12, the child was 9 years old, went to the mother and father and said, my sister is watching porn on his cell phone. So the parents confronted the 9-year-old, and the 9-year-old said, no, but it's grandfather that exposed me. Grandpa exposed me to this when we go and visit there. The parents, the dad, it's his dad, was frantic, totally hypervigilant, and went to the child and said to her, you need to tell us the truth now. Did it happen or didn't it happen? Because grandpa can go to jail. The mother was very, very angry towards the grandpa, and she just wanted to cut contact and think that the child would not lie about this. But since the dad reacted like that, the child was referred to a forensic social worker. She just shut down. She refused to talk anything about that. So the mother obviously said no contact between the grandparents and the child. The father had difficulty with that. It's his father. The child in the end was referred to me for therapy, but even with me, she was very defensive. I didn't try to get info, but even just in normal ways of therapy, you could see that she has this thick layer of defenses now. So what I want to say, and what I picked up, is that your first response, the very first time when the child revealed just a little bit of info, what is the reaction then? The details of abuse memory are only important if they serve to protect the child from further abuse, as in the clinician being a mandated reporter, or the child is using a detail to work through the abuse. Now, the details themselves have no magical power to help the child progress. Helping a child to understand that some people feel better after sharing details about the abuse is different than insisting on the details. Okay, so that's the important point. Now, so mistaken attributions associated with the memory of the details are far more important in treatment. Now, in terms of therapy, now in terms of ethics, what are the core beliefs that the child took up because of what happened? For example, you can't trust people very close to you. The context of the abuse is what is holding the mistaken core beliefs. Thus, in therapy, we want to correct mistaken attributions. So the work of the clinician is to stay within the ethical framework of assessing the child through the process and avoid attributions that can negatively affect the child's life. If you are the therapist and not the clinician that are the mandated reporter, or you're not involved in the forensics anymore, your work is not to push the child to reveal all the detail, but to focus. And I've seen that with my teenager with the mandala case that I told you about, that absolute hypervigilance of I'm dirty, and the body shivering like that. That is one of the mistaken beliefs about herself. That working through that to stop the trauma trigger around that, because the moment when she started feeling I'm dirty, she started self-mutilating, and that's where the burning with the boiling water came from, and the cutting her flesh with the tweezer and all of that. So the work, okay, so specifically refers to negative core beliefs internalized. It's almost as if that is more, that is what keeps the re-traumatizing. That is what affects the child the longest, is what do I start to believe about myself because of what happens. The victim owns the memories. It's their right to share or not to share at the pace they desire and can manage. It's intensely private, sometimes very embarrassing and painful. And there's a huge difference between encouraging exploration of a memory once it is brought up and relentlessly pressing for details. Therefore, it's absurd to call a child resistant to therapy, and often it can be called an overinflation of the clinician's ego. So it brings me back to that our work that we have to do on ourselves in terms of the countertransference. Resistance is a normal part of a therapy process. It is to be expected and respected. It actually shows that the child has an amount of a sense of self. So I was once working with an adult client that had a lot of childhood trauma. And I was seeing him for almost 2 years. And one day, at the end of about a 2 years therapy series, he came in and he was crying, and he said, I could see that he's highly distressed. And he said, how do I tell you that? How do I tell you that? So, I mean, he was maybe in his 30s or so. And yeah, I was just empathetic and say, like, you can tell me whatever you want to tell me, you can decide, and so forth. And he did reveal stuff about abuse. But if I look back, it was 2 years of determining, is it safe, talking about stuff, talking about more safe stuff, like the work, my marriage, my children, being a father, all kinds of stuff. And I think that in general, that's a normal flow of therapy. Now, moving from safer stuff to stuff. I mean, like the unconscious will also suppress the more painful stuff deeper in the unconscious with more rigid defenses around that. All right, so continuous and repeated pressing for details and recounting is abusive, damaging, and driving symptoms deeper into the unconscious, or, the pain, and is unethical. Okay, but Bianca say, I spoke to a child who revealed abuse, and when I tried to refer it, a senior of mine was contacted by the parents and told that the child is lying. And the child was told she was not allowed to come near me again, according to other children who reported the conversation to me. The child was crying uncontrollably at the time and used to lurk around corners looking at me at times after being told not to come near to me. No, I mean, that is, I would say that is quite unethical. I would took it up with the senior, or with the person who, like in terms of the adults that were involved there. Even if the child, I mean, there are cases when children lie, especially in parental alienation cases, in divorce. Now, sometimes they are brainwashed by a parent to say these things, but in this case, it must have felt very traumatic to you. And isn't that a form of abuse, to refuse for a child to come close to you? All right, so who told the child that she's not allowed to come close to you, the parents or the senior? Now, that's the other thing. Because, I mean, if it's a senior, I will definitely take it up as for, okay, you're not sure. Because you see, that would make a difference. Now, if it's a parent, it's part of that brainwashing that we're talking about. If it is the senior, I would take that up. I would make noise about that. I would lodge a complaint about that. No. But now you are almost making the bad guy or whatever. Now, as if you, and unfortunately, now sometimes some parents, especially narcissistic parents, they have power in terms of school environments. Now, some of these parents are on the board of the school now, so they have a secret covert power to influence what happens and what doesn't happen, and they support the child, the school, financially and all of that. So yeah, that must have been very hard for you. Trish asked, what if the court demands a report from you as the child's therapist, not a person doing disclosure forensic assessment? So, okay. What I do is in my informed consent initially, I write and the parents sign, I do not provide reports around my sessions with children. Okay, that's not when the court, I'm just saying now. So to make sure that if parents come in, especially in divorce cases, if there's a possible custody battle, I make very sure that both parents sign informed consent. As far as possible, I'm quite strict about that. And I don't even make an appointment before I don't have that signed informed consent. And then the second thing is on the informed consent, it's written a lot of things, but also that. So if a court demand a report, if it's court order, you don't really have a choice to put in your notes. I've worked now, I've done supervision with psychologists that was court ordered now. And what we did is I went with her through her notes just to make sure, okay, so she was very frustrated and angry because she also don't want to write reports. And she was kind of caught into this because I think I referred to that yesterday. Now, the mother said this, and then actually there was lots of lawyers and people involved. So also what you can do if this is really not your thing is to try to stay out of situations that by the intake you hear there's a lot of fighting and, like custody stuff. And even if they say it's just for therapy, like it isn't always. So sometimes we can protect ourselves, but not getting involved in the first place. But if the court demands a report, what I would write is, for example, I had 12 sessions with the child. In session 1, the child told me this, or through the projective techniques, this came out. My professional opinion about it is this. In the second session, this, and this. My professional opinion about it is this. And just be very careful not to put in stuff that is controversial. Now, in other words, don't to make assumptions about stuff that can be, like bring trouble to you or in cross-examination and stuff. But as far as possible, me and most of my supervisees don't want to do that, and try as far as possible to stay out of that. But I mean, sometimes you just get the court order and you don't have a choice. All right, traumatic memory is often fuzzy. When under assault, the victim's task is survival, not an accurate recording of details. So the other thing is the moment when a child don't feel safe, the child go back to the survival defenses, survival instincts, which might then be hyper or hypervigilance. And the moment they are there, the neocortical areas switch off and they will struggle to give all the details. Part of memories will be literally gone. I saw that with my mandala client before the ketamine. She could just not, she couldn't remember lots of the detail. This might lead to adults misunderstanding what's going on and to begin accuse the child of lying. Years ago, when I was working at a place of safety, there was a teenager that was removed because of behavioral problems. Her dad had a very high position. I remember, it's like 25 years back, I think in the military. And she revealed severe sexual abuse stuff, but really bad. So, I mean, we did the right thing, got the child protection unit at that time. That was what they were called, got them in, they took a declaration. But then it just started coming from the minister and everyone that was involved with this father in his high position, that the child's a liar, or she has behavioral problems, this has never happened. So, which brings certain emotions in us as a therapist, because sometimes a child can be very convincing, and in this specific case, I didn't think the child was lying. I've had very, very little cases where I thought the child was lying, except if there's a brainwashing parent. Like I say, then you need to be more careful. Okay, and it only serves to teach the child to never speak about the abuse again. So what happened to that abuse? It goes deeper into the unconscious, where it keeps on re-traumatizing the child inside. And I had a case where a mother who was sexually abused as a child, and she pushed it down to the unconscious and didn't remember it on conscious level. And you will often get with parents who has been sexually abused, they are extremely hypervigilant that their child might be sexually abused. So it might be a parent that never allow the child to sleep out, like sometimes too much. They're almost attracting that by being so, not having worked through their own stuff. But anyway, this mom, one day when she came around the corner, the neighbor, a neighbor child was sexually touching a child and stuff. And when she saw that, suddenly her own unconscious opened up, and she remembered her own childhood abuse. And it was so traumatizing to her that she was admitted in psychiatric hospital to work through that, because she couldn't handle what happened to her child and then all her stuff that came out. So why is that? And we read about that in the newspapers, that frequently only these stuff come out when people are adults and they are ready to speak up a bit about that. Accept fuzzy memory as a fact, and pressing for clarity might damage the child's treatment potential in the future, even more so if the child experiences the adult who is questioning them as disapproving of the memory gaps. Remember, they don't have the memory gaps on purpose. No, so it's just another thing of there's something wrong with me, or I'm crazy. Traumatic memory is by nature often transferable. The well-known, this is a difficult part. I've spoke about it a bit earlier this week. Well-known phenomenon of transference applies to abusive memories. So foster parents especially experience the transferred accusations of abuse from foster children with post-traumatic stress disorder. So the foster parent is not guilty. The child has suppressed of what happened in the real home, and they start idealizing the biological parents with the trauma bond, and start accusing the foster parents of what the biological parents do. And we need to be careful here now. Although it might not make sense, this is part of the child's healing. But I mean, if it's like sexual abuse stuff, that can bring a bit of trouble to the foster parents. So that's why I say we need to be very careful also to pick up, can it be part of the transference? As a way of trying to make sense of what has happened to them, the child might transfer emotion and psychic energy from the abuser to the foster parent. The same they might also do towards you, not necessarily accusing you of abusing them, but, like experiencing the transference towards you if you're not available, or if they, like for whatever reason they don't like you, whatever the case, if you push them too much for info stuff. So in terms of the two kids that told me they don't like the doctor, it would be interesting to go deeper and see what does that doctor who does that doctor remind them of? What is it about the way in which the professional, act or treat them in therapy that they don't like? So one of the reasons why this happens is because the child has experienced that the foster parent is a strong and safe enough person that can tolerate and depersonalize the child's emotions surrounding the genuine abuse. So it actually is a good testimony for the foster parents. And it brings us back to what I said yesterday, is that a substitute parent that take these children with these histories into their care need to be very differentiated with a strong ego. All right, so we as professionals need to be very careful about how we react and treat such accusations. For example, just immediately more forensic investigations and removal from one foster home to another. Now, there are the legal stuff here, but just in the back of your head, remember the possibility of transference. It provides an ethical dilemma. On the one hand, there are legal obligations in terms of reporting, and on the other hand, it might be a healthy transference and part of a child's healing. Okay. Right. So I'm going to give you a quick 15 minutes in the breakout room, and just I want you to have a quick discussion. How do you feel about this type of transference, and have you ever been involved in a situation like that? 15 minutes, so it's 20 past now, and we'll come back here at 25 to 10. Let's see. Okay, there you go. Welcome back. Before I forget, those of you who want to claim your CPD points for this workshop, please remember to write your professional registration number in the chat box. The people registered at the HPCSA, I will submit your points. You get quite a bit of points and ethical points. And the people registered at other boards and the social work board, you need to send me your evaluation form, and then I'm going to send you your certificate. And on your certificate, the points will be stated. I think it's about 24.5 points. So quite a bit of points. So don't forget to do that. All right, let's move on a little bit. We're still working on ethical rules when working with memory material of child victims. So while accusations, of course, need to be investigated with diligence for the child's safety, that should also be understood as possible transference that are part and parcel of the care. And it could be used by the wise clinician as part of the therapy, as a springboard for progress. So supernatural wisdom is needed by the treatment team involved. And I think that we don't always have that for all members of the team, but that is what's actually necessary. The most important aspect is just to become aware of the phenomenon of transference in all interventions with these kids. Now, they will have transference towards adults in their life, be it substitute parents, teachers, or you as a therapist. Traumatic memory is by nature often evolving. It is often evolving into a more manageable piece of baggage, one that is more understood by the victim and hopefully gradually becomes lighter to bear. So time and patience is needed for this, and this needs to be handled by everyone involved in the child's life on a daily basis as it appears. All memory is dependent upon the individual's development and must be handled with respect to that development. All development refers to all development. Now, intellectual, chronological maturity, moral and ethical development, and psychosocial development. Now, when a child reveals abuse, tell the child that you will need to tell other people about this. So, for example, I'm sorry you were hurt. Children should never be hurt in that way. I'm going to try hard to make sure that you are never hurt again by that person. And then older kids like adolescents, you can directly state that you will need to report the abuse and what it entails. And like I said earlier, I do that, and they normally understand that. All right, let's talk now a little bit about the family preservation bias. You remember I referred to that yesterday, and I thought it would be a good aspect to include when we talk about ethics. So the challenge to progress with abuse stress disorder children is one of the challenges is the family preservation bias. So where a child is forced to be exposed to a family member who is a strong trigger or actually the actual perpetrator. And the intensity and depth of a child's stress behavior should be the guiding factor in contact rather than a misplaced effort to maintain the parent-child bond. I sincerely feel that the courts have heard about bonding therapy. They require that in most cases. If I say the court, obviously the different people involved there, and that the stress behavior of the child in terms of what we can measure in the stress scales are not always taken into account. And like I said earlier, now, especially what happens 24 to 72 hours after exposure to a parent that was a previous perpetrator. I was involved in a case where mom and dad was married. It was a high conflict marriage. The children were exposed to extreme violence from dad towards mom, very extreme. Both kids had symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder, and after mom and dad divorced, the children went to mom, and they showed extreme trauma symptoms when dad tried to phone them and absolutely refused to go and visit dad. So then was, after all the investigations and the family advocate, there was a court order that the children should receive trauma therapy, and which I would be the therapist. And then if I feel that the kids are ready, then they should move over to bonding therapy with the dad. But what happened was that the children knew, especially the eldest, that if she was about grade 5, when she come to me, it means that I need to do some work, and then she will be forced to see her dad again. So that triggered the trauma response to come to me. So we tried a few times, and the child had, I've never seen, I mean, like she got so first hypervigilant in the car and then hypovigilant and literally fall asleep in the car, which is not at all typical of her. I mean, like falling asleep 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And the second time also, she was just, she couldn't handle the fact. And actually, previously we had a good bond, but the moment when it became like, this is going to lead to this, it severely hampered the bond. And I just wrote a letter to the lawyers and say that I can't do trauma therapy with the child because there's no way the trauma symptoms is so severe. There's no way that I can get her in my room. So they must either consider appointing someone else, or I don't know. But this was a case, and the dad, he wasn't really interested in the children. But anyway, severe trauma symptoms by the idea of I have to face him again. The child also, one of her post-traumatic stress symptoms was severe nightmares that the dad come and steal them, her and her sister. She had a lot of PTSD symptoms. If the child's bond with the parent is so damaged that the child has PTSD as a result, the child's individual healing needs to take priority. I wonder if you agree. I hope so. Like I said, there is a bit of a change that I see nowadays, that in court reports or recommendations from family advocate, they will say the child first needs therapy and then bonding therapy. But I have been contacted by a family advocate, a child who's a little boy whose dad was in jail. And he was also exposed to highly traumatic violence between mom and dad before that. And the dad secretly, like he found a telephone to phone the boy from the jail, in the jail. He's not supposed to have a telephone, and to try to contact the boy, and then threatening the boy that was 4 years old. And then I wrote a letter and I said, before we can talk about any contact with the dad, the child needs trauma therapy. And the family advocate contacted me and was very rude and said, I'm hampering her in the work that she needs to do. And very much I don't want to say taking the side of the dad, but there's a lot of, and it's not just something that I hear here where I work, and some now and then are exposed to. I don't do a lot of that, but I hear it countrywide now, the frustrations in terms of this. So trying to maintain a bond between a parent and a child when the child still have PTSD and trauma and triggers is like putting a band-aid over a gaping chest wound. So forced contact with triggering person inhibits the child's ability to heal. Contact need to be controlled and managed if it takes place. And observing the child during visitations with triggering family members, the child, and I said this earlier this week, now the child might appear cheerful, positive, unafraid, and affectionate, which just think back about the dynamics of the child sexual abuse accommodation syndrome that we've just discussed, which I said is just as much applicable with other forms of abuse. So that thing of just observing an interaction between a parent and a child, between a one-way mirror, and then according to that, often cases where actually the child, the family advocate or whoever now doing the investigation, the social worker writes the child need to have more contact with the abusive parent. It also sometimes happens that the child is so scared that when they are interviewed, they would say that they like to have more contact, or even they are threatened beforehand. I've had cases where a parent call a child before the session with the social worker at the office of the family advocate and say, if you dare say this and that will happen. So sure. The child's behavior adapt and accommodate the context of the visit and who is present. And remember what I said, they want to know where the next shot comes from. Often the caseworker is not present 24 to 72 hours after the visit. And this is when the child's stress behavior will be highly present. In other words, this is when you have to visit the child, or how does the child react in the car of the foster parents after the visit with the parent? Isn't that what we need to observe? There was even foster parents that made a video of the child's complete meltdown as a plea to say, just look at this. Often foster children have clearly different behavior following a visit or contact. If treatment is moving according to plan, reactivity behavior should become less. I mean, like if everything goes with reference to what a child with post-traumatic stress disorder symptoms need to get healed, reactivity should become less. If stress reactivity is very intense and takes a long time to settle, there might be a need to stop all contact for now with the triggering biological family member. If it's severe, so how would we see that? The child keeps on carrying that high allostatic level. So all those PTSD symptoms and behaviors that are on their child stress profile. Now, especially look at the first few questions that focus on the allostasis. So the child's hypervigilant, the child don't sleep through the night, the child suddenly want to sleep with the foster parents, the child get nightmares, the child have separation anxiety to go to school, and it keeps on going on and almost sometimes don't even recover before the next visit is there. So the child does not return to homeostasis physiologically or emotionally between visits. Often the child has barely reached a stage of calm before it's time for another visit. Now, it's also not a first preference to just by matter of fact stop contact between a child and a biological family member. We must also put great consideration in terms of that, because sometimes that now brings other problems. For example, abandonment issues and so I mean, like, it keeps being a hot potato. It doesn't have to be permanent if we stop contact. Now, it might be a temporary measure to allow the child to heal and build ego strength and gain skills. I'm thinking about the child whose dad tried to drive over the mum in front of the child after a divorce and to kill the mum. I mean, the child had such trauma symptoms after that. If I think he came to me for trauma therapy, and I mean, he refused to go to the dad, but if I look at what he played out and what type of miniatures that he picked for the dad, now in terms of how he, like what is, if he have to pick any miniature for any family member, and what it actually picked a monster for the dad. But there was intervention, there was trauma therapy, the child became stronger, and then gradually there was bonding therapy and things became better. So a moratorium on contact should be tailored to the levels of reactivity in the child. Some need total contact removal or contact. Now, visits and phone calls. Others can tolerate phone calls without stress reactions. So, and then slowly increase the kind, duration, and frequency of contacts at a level the child can tolerate. That is the important thing. Now, so look for the stress related symptoms afterwards. That shows us what the child can tolerate. The parents, if contact is stopped, the parent need to be informed about this and the reasons about that being written out. So, like because of this and this and this that happened, because the child observed that you tried to kill the mother, or because the child continuously hear the bad things that you say about the mother or the father, or, like whatever the case. Now, okay, Trish Shay, our local psychologist, had a meeting with the Office of the Family Advocate in an effort to resolve ongoing problems. When asked what the theoretical basis for their recommendations was, the family advocate said practicality and common sense. Ish. We were also told that the observation by the social workers was focused on whether the child showed fear towards the parents, such lack of understanding. Yeah, I absolutely agree. And that's the thing that I'm trying to say here now, is that you can't observe a session between a parent and a child behind a one-way mirror and then decide, okay, the child need to go more. Children are very good to protect themselves from further abuse. Look at what happened afterwards. So what you're saying, Trish, is that what I'm saying is true. Now, it's a universal problem that there's lack of understanding, even unfortunately from social workers sometimes working there. Yeah, and I also feel that, and I'm saying that with careful, but lots of times there's also no understanding of personality disorders. Now, and traits of personality disorders, for example, how charming and parroting, that's a thing a narcissistic parent can be. They know the right answers. They've learned that they can really, sorry for my word, bullshit a therapist that have no knowledge of that, because I mean, you only see this person with all the right knowledge, very charming, knowing all of that, and then the other parent, often that's falling apart mentally because of all the abuse, that one is accused of being the unstable parent. Yeah, I can go on for a long time about this, but yeah, it makes me quite really very angry. All right, let's talk about ethics when treating suicidality in children. Okay, so here is a picture of a child, teenager, mom and dad, high conflict divorce, lots of all the behaviors and symptoms that we've talked about the whole week. And then what happened, and I said to you, it happens often, is that she couldn't cope in school anymore. Every time that she had to go to school, she got panic attacks there. Very typical thing that happened is that I just don't cope in normal school system because of the all the trauma triggers, the system, the lack of understanding of the traumatized child, and so. And the parents were very much thinking that she is the parents were thinking that she is manipulating and she is faking, and they got angry because every day at 9 she found the mother and she asked the mother to come and pick her up from the school. She's not feeling well, and then the mother freaked out because she has to go from work, and the mother was dysregulated. But yeah, when she came into a session, this is what she drew. She said, I have no mom and dad. The school, I can't function at school. There's no one that cares for me at my home. I don't have any family. And look at this now, how typical, if you think about how rain is, water is a symbol of emotion, and actually the thunderstorm, now the thunder that is on her. And she was here thinking about some friends that she have, but they were far away. And I mean, she was clearly drawing that I'm going to kill myself here. Rest in peace. Now, I mean, there's no way in which you cannot take this seriously. So let's talk a bit about the ethics here. Right, so ethics about assessment and treatment of children and adolescents with suicidal behavior. Incidence of suicide or self-death, as it is called now, reaches a peak during the mid-adolescent years. This is according to research. It's rare before puberty, but possible in younger kids as young as 6 years old. I have worked with that. I've worked with a boy, I think he was grade 3, and he had a knife in the classroom, and he threatened to stab himself in the heart in front of all the kids, and they were so traumatized. But there was very good reason for that. More and more preschoolers and primary school children suffers from untreated major depressive disorder too. And we have an ethical obligation to know how to identify those at the greatest risk, how to provide treatment, how to advise and counsel the child, adolescent, and parent survivors if there was a self-death, how to provide guidance to educational systems, and what is more appropriate and inappropriate directions for self-death prevention programs. So that's what I'm going to talk about. All right, so factors, and this is now all according to different research that predispose completed self-death, pre-existing psychiatric disorders, biological and social psychological factors. So lots of the things that we've discussed this week, especially if there are no help. No one is hearing, there are different warning signs, child is always unhappy, child don't come out of his or her room anymore, stuff like that. 90% of adolescents who commit self-death suffer from an associated psychiatric disorder at the time. Some of them did not receive any treatment. Some of them didn't, like no one know about it. And others did have warning signs, but the parents ignore it. Stress events often precedes this. For example, the loss of a romantic relationship, disciplinary troubles in school or with the law, academic or family difficulties, peer-related conflicts, and bullying. I think that would be the most obvious with teenagers. It often comes from the underlying mental disorder itself and then the trauma symptoms, or maybe a normative outcome of uncontrollable events like a death in the family. So if you think back about the work that we've done this week, if you think about bipolar disorder 2, bipolar 2, that is often part a morbid diagnosis with the children with PTSD. And we think about the trouble that brings, the mood dysregulation, the trouble that brings in social relationships, and all the work that we've talked about, trouble in relationship with boyfriend and girlfriend, and abandonment sensitivities. Then the unstable relationships add on to abandonment, and that add to suicidality. Mood disorders in boys very much comorbid with conduct disorder and substance abuse, according to research, and in child abuse resulting in psychopathology and substance abuse. So also children who are exposed to child abuse, any type of child abuse over a long period of time, no treatment, especially the emotional abuses that no one wants to see, and like that's not a reason to be removed out of your parental home. Or like one mother said, that was very emotionally abusive towards a child, but also borderline. My child will not go to the hostel. The child wanted to go to hostel so that you have a little bit of space from the mom's episode of emotional dysregulation, and the mother was just refusing that. Other contributing aspects: poor parent-child communication, a previous suicide attempt is more predicative in males. Substance and alcohol abuse brings a significant increase risk in teenagers 16 years and older. Now, something that I can add here that I've recently picked up in that I recently picked up in new research that I've read is that children with a lot of trauma that is stored in the right brain. The right brain is our emotional brain. The left brain is our logical brain. So often when children move towards have untreated depression and they become suicidal, the right brain goes offline now, and the left brain, that is very cause effect logical, is online, and the left brain see self-death as the only way out. Now, so the right brain is more in terms of emotions, different emotions, considering things, but the left brain is very logical and would then also be the part of the brain that is less scared to do that because the right brain is offline. So I think that's that's an interesting thing also to understand, like in the end when a child, and we know that it's a disease now and it has phases and yeah. Okay, so then family pathology and a history of family suicidal behavior. A previous suicide attempt increased the risk of boys committing self-death. Notably, irritable, impulsive, volatile behavior, emotions, and prone to outbursts of aggression. That also shows us that the child is either in a hypervigilant mode, which is where we will see this now, the fight responses, or hypervigilant, where they are totally numb and cut off. Then also schizophrenia, borderline personality. And now that's not diagnosed before the age of 18, but you can frequently see the traits. And again, very much comorbid to post-traumatic stress disorder. They also talk about a pre-borderline, that PTSD symptoms can very much overlap with some of the borderline symptoms. But I also want to say, if it's picked up soon enough and the child is removed to a situation that's safer and stable, it can be prevented from going over to full-blown borderline personality disorder. Whereas if there are no safety and it goes on and on and on, the situation in which the child lived and the reasons why all of these develop and the brain damage, yeah, and the lack of object constancy and lack of identity formation and all that happens with that, like it's more difficult. But there is a better prognosis for teenagers than an adult that didn't receive treatment or yeah. Other personality disorders, cognitive distortions that accompany depression, and then I've referred to the catastrophizing. So kids who are very much rigid in their thinking, all or nothing thinking. Now, something is either all good or all bad. And a history of family psychopathology. So when we have this intergenerational trauma where it's just unstable, high conflict, all of the dysfunctional things are going on and on and on and on. And remember that the big thing of the suicidal part, depending on from which framework you look, but it sometimes really feel as the only way out. There's just no solution. This is never going to change. I've lost all hope. And the other thing is, remember that inner persecutor that is constellated in the self-care system of a traumatized child, that kind of try to arrange a death wish in a child. So when I do assessment now, I also distinguish between a death wish and suicidality. A death wish is a wish to escape, and the only way to escape is through death. So I wish I can be dead. Have you ever wished that you can die? There are very little kids, especially a bit older, that don't say yes. There has been a time in my life that I wish I could be dead, specifically now the children that are really suffering more. Whereas suicidality is obviously where you have a plan, you want to kill yourself. It's not just a wish that you can die. I also had a teenager that, oh shame, her best friend drowned, and they were friends from 5 years old. They were like twins. And she had a severe death wish because she was just so longing to see her friend again. All right, then anxious children without comorbidity show often no overt sign of depression, often excellent students and well-liked by peers. So it's the child that can go on very well with normal life, but yeah, you're very much compliant child. Nah, and that's almost the ones with the silent depression where no one can understand when they commit self-death. Death of these teenagers often come with a great surprise because they were known to be the good children. And I want to say again, I get very concerned if a child is too good to be true, because what is really lingering underneath? Perfectionism is a risk factor for suicidal ideation because it becomes more and more difficult as a child gets older, especially if they don't have medication to treat the anxiety and don't have therapy for that rigidity. It becomes just too much to handle. You can't do everything perfect anymore. Most suicide, there's an element of impulsivity preceded by a stressful event. So one of my kids, teenagers, the boyfriend, they stopped the relationship. Now, in other words, the relationship was over and she drank a lot of her pills. And fortunately, because the child was alone at home, the mother was at work, the boyfriend, for one or other reason, he went home and he turned around and came back and saw what happened. And he actually literally carried that child to the closest hospital because, I mean, there was no transport. The hospital wasn't far, but he saved her life. It's hard for us as professionals also if that happened with one of our child clients. And I'm glad to say that I've had a few of my clients with suicide attempts, although they were on treatment, although they were in psychiatric treatment, although have been admitted in psychiatric hospitals, but fortunately never had one that has been successful. But that's hard on us, and that can really create secondary trauma and guilt and all of that. Mass suicides are precipitated in already suicidal teen by exposure to or news of another person's self-death. So that's another thing now, that you get a school and there's suddenly 3 kids that do that or read about it. So it's more common in adolescent and adult males than females, a rate of 3 to 1. Risk factors are the same. Suicidal ideation is common in kids of both genders. And then look at things like substance abuse, separation anxiety can be one, mood and anxiety disorder, panic attacks, that it's just, I can't live with that because it anyway feels like you are dying when you're having a panic attack. Aggressiveness, extreme aggressiveness in boys. So sometimes self-death can also be an act of extreme aggression, an act of revenge, love. Okay, now let me show you what I'm going to do now. And I mean, obviously, it brings often enormous guilt. There's the whole grieving process is different because of the guilt. And then not all younger kids understand that suicide might result in irreversible death. Adolescent self-death attempts differ from ideation. There's a more so just thinking about it or really attempting to do it. Now, so the ones who attempt to do it have more severe and enduring feelings of helplessness, isolation, that extreme being alone. One of the traits is that they isolate themselves. Now they withdraw, sit in their room, don't go out anymore, don't want to go anywhere, don't open the curtains, sit in a dark room, and reluctance to discuss the thoughts. Most of the teenagers, we're going to talk about that, but when they come here, they do tell me quite honestly about what they think and if they've planned it and when last did they feel about that, think about that, and so. So the attempts at the greatest risk for suicide, if you think about the history, if you ask them, are you still thinking of suicide? Have you made a previous attempt? The mental state, depressed, manic, hypomania, severely anxious, child, one of my clients that tried to jump out of a car recently, substance abuse, irritability, agitation, threatening violence to others, and then like almost your paranoid depression, delusional hallucinations. So we all know that emergency referral to a psychiatrist. So take the child to the emergency unit of a hospital. Maladaptive coping styles, hopelessness, negative views about their own competence, poor self-esteem, and over-responsibility. Even extreme guilt feelings for a negative event, sometimes even if it is not their fault, can also lead to that. And then there are also our kids. Now, I mean, we can talk the whole day about all the research in terms of what happens in the brain and what happens in the brain of early traumatized kids, and the brain, like what happens to the neurotransmitters there. But some kids have a biological predisposition for depression, and they just have a dysregulation of the serotonin system and all the, and there are kids that even have depression in preschool years now. So also look out for that now, where it isn't a trauma and it isn't something that happened or something that they were exposed to. It's very difficult, even for the most skilled clinician, to determine if an adolescent who have made a serious self-death attempt will do so again. You don't know. Sometimes parents want to know. Now, I've been involved in a case where a mother wanted the psychiatrist after the child was discharged from the hospital after admittance to write a letter to state that this child will not commit suicide. No one of us can do that now. Some never do. Others who had what only looked like a mild gesture may eventually do that. And then the self-death clusters, when a lot of kids do that, if there has been an excessive number of self-death in a close geographic proximity, often that there's an element of imitation there. So what are the ethical appropriate interventions? Always look out for signs of clinical depression, depressed mood, most of the time all these. Now, loss of interest or pleasure in usual activities, weight loss or gain, cannot sleep, sleep too much, restless, slow down, fatigue, loss of energy, worthlessness, guilty, low self-esteem, disappointed with himself, hopeless about the future. That's a big one, especially for traumatized kids. Like sometimes I have no support from parents of, I want to do this or that next year, and the parent will just say there's no money, or, like there's no support in terms. I have one teenager. There's no support in terms of getting a driver's license, getting her learners, filling in the forms for university. Nothing, just nothing. Or, like the child write matric and then there's just no resources or help or support or anything. And the child, like sit there and can't move forward. Cannot concentrate, a school marks dropping, reoccurring thoughts of death, irritability, and upset by little things. Signs of mania, hypomania, that's part of bipolar, depressed mood most of the time, and then elated, expansive, or irritable mood. This is what we've talked about earlier this week in terms of bipolar and the link between that and trauma, because lots of the adolescents that I work with that come from very traumatic environments have this. Now, they're either depressed and suicidal, and then they are irritable, and then suddenly they go into the hypomania, inflated self-esteem, grandiose, decreased need for sleep. Now, that's a manic episode. Now, pressured speeds, racing thoughts, abrupt topic changes, excessive participation in multiple activities, agitated, restless, hypersexual, and very impulsive. Now, so we need to make sure that gatekeepers, teachers, parents, and peers are educated about the warning signs. That is very important. Okay, well, it means the social workers should not be afraid to use the word suicide, call it on the name. Yes, sometimes one tries to soften that, but it's not helpful. Yeah, I agree. Now, I call it by the name. That is what it is. That's not something we need to call it by the name, because then they also, I don't know, they're quite honest with me. I even have a few teenagers, a handful of teenagers that they do have my cell number, and they can and have sent me a WhatsApp when things are really bad. Now I can't be on suicide watch for 100 teenagers that have traumatic backgrounds. I don't see that much clients, but what I want to say is that I can, if there's really no support and there's no parental support, I've given my number to them, and they don't misuse that, they don't abuse that or bother me unnecessarily. But when they're really in trouble, they send me a WhatsApp, and when they do that, I will interfere and I will schedule an appointment, and it definitely have saved lives in terms of if that help was not available. All right, we can also obtain information from a third party if the child is not immediately hospitalized or receiving psychiatric intervention. Arrange adequate supervision and support as long as needed. So 24 hours a day, suicide watch. Before psychiatric intervention takes place, look at the degree of planning involved, the degree to which the change of intervention or discovery was minimized. I also want to say, one mother, she would say to the child, now jump out of the window. Do you want me to find you in a little, I don't know, even the word that she used, there on the floor, full of blood. That's not the right way to do it, no. But the mom is borderline. As a responsible adult must sanitize the environment by securing or disposing potentially lethal medication and firearms. That's the other thing now. So things, I would also ask the child now in terms of their plan, what would they like to do? Some kids have done research. They will show me on my phone, I've done research on what is the best way to commit suicide, or what would be easy to do in our home. So they will tell you, nah, I wanted to hang myself, wanted to drink overdose of pills, I will get access to a firearm or so. Now, the value of no suicide contracts, in other words, if you say to the child, okay, but I'm going to help you, but then I want you to sign here that you're not going to do anything to yourself. Where the adolescent agree not to engage in self-harming behavior and to tell an adult if she has suicidal urges is not known. Adolescents might not be in a mental state to accept or understand the contract, or they might sign it, but just still do it when they are in a moment of impulsivity, of extreme pain, or what. So the family and the clinician cannot relax their vigilance because a contract has been signed. In fact, I don't really think, I don't use that because I don't think, you have control about the triggers that's going to happen, or all the things that I've just said. Crisis hotlines, research failed to show that it reduced the incidence of suicide. Restricting their access to firearms might lead to short-term reduction in suicide rates. Then self-death awareness programs in schools frequently minimize the role of mental illness, although it's designed to encourage self-disclosure by students or third-party disclosure by friends. It has not been shown to be effective in reducing suicidal behavior or increasing help-seeking behavior. Now, I'm not saying that's according to research. I'm not saying that, for a child, if a friend tell them, I'm going to kill myself, not to go and tell. But the fact that the awareness programs, you will see that there's a better way that works better. So curriculum-based suicide awareness program might disturb high-risk students. A safer approach is to focus on the clinical traits of depression and other mental illnesses that predispose suicidality. So, do you feel, when you feel irritable most of the time, or you feel that you're going to go into this impulsive mode, or all the other traits that we have discussed? talks and lectures about self-death to groups of children. So not one-on-one in your session, that's fine, but an adolescent should be discouraged. It has a propensity to activate suicidal ideation in adolescents with mental disorders, whose identity is not usually known to the presenter of the program. Yeah, I think the same type of thing happened now with all the TikTok. You know, there are kids that make TikToks of their attempted suicide. Imagine that. So, and that definitely that can activate suicidal ideation in a child that already feel helpless. Screening of self-death education programs for teenagers that does not include procedures to evaluate and refer identified ideators or attempters are not endorsed. Direct screening programs are recommended. So in terms, especially for school counselors, might identify those with the underlying risk factors and refer them for appropriate intervention. Direct case finding is the most excellent and the cost-effective way of prevention. So identify the possible at-risk children in the setting and screening specifically of 15 to 90 years old and 19. And then get them into the school counselor's office, even if we just know that they have a very difficult situation at home or there's instability. They might be the ones that are screened. So as a general rule, when I see a teenager referred to me, I always screen for suicidality. So screen for previous self-death attempts, recent serious self-death preoccupations, depression, complication of alcohol and substance abuse, often part of how they self-medicate, and refer for psychiatric intervention if necessary. According to research, educating primary practitioners on how to evaluate mood disorders and suicidality resulted in the reduction of the number of self-death and self-death attempts. So I think that is a more important thing. Now, is that I was once invited at a school to talk about anxiety and depression in children at a school staff meeting long ago. And I was so surprised by the short number, the short, the little time they gave me. I think they gave me something like 10 minutes, and there was almost that message of, like, please do this quickly. We have other things to discuss. And that was a school with a big number of children that were at risk. So it brings us back to the whole thing of trauma-informed school, what type of training teachers need to have, because teachers are also in the position to pick up on this. So educate all clinicians that encounter adolescents, not just mental health clinicians, about recognizing and referral. Counselors who may lack the time or resources to evaluate a child or a teenager's mental state should make use of self-completion questionnaires. That help a lot. And I do make use of these questionnaires. There are lots of them available. You can download that from Google. Now, mood and feelings questionnaires for adolescents that screen for depression and suicidality, because they are often, I don't know, but they do write, they do mark there. They do write, I have considered killing myself in the future, in the past. What screening programs? Okay, so I'm referring to screening for depression. Now, so not a program, but screening for, okay, so all the at-risk teenagers now have to complete a questionnaire in which there's a screening for depression, self-death preoccupations, and previous suicidal behavior. Now, so if you don't have the time to talk all of them through, and they complete a questionnaire, and then out of the questionnaire, you can identify who are at risk and need to be referred. Because, sometimes a school have 1,000 kids now, and a child might write on a questionnaire that they would not necessarily in another way, disclose. There's ample evidence that teenagers in their mid and late adolescence will, if asked, reveal this information, especially it's applicable to school counselors. That I've never had a child that they would sometimes look at me a bit hesitant, but the mere fact that they don't answer me immediately and that they know that it's safe. I've never had a teenager that have not disclosed to me either suicidal ideation or a current suicidality or what they've planned to do. When last did they feel like that? Never. Okay, and then the other thing is, if possible, advise media reporters and editors on the dangers of excessive coverage of individual self-deaths, because children pick up on that and then sometimes they do that too. Questions that can be asked during assessment, even in a questionnaire or during an interview. Did you ever feel so upset that you wish you were not alive or wanted to die? Did you ever do something that you knew was so dangerous that you could hurt or kill yourself? Did you ever hurt or try to hurt yourself? Did you ever think about or try to commit self-death? Did you ever do anything to get ready to kill yourself? Did you ever think what you would do, what would kill you? Yeah, evaluation is complicated, screen and refer. Then evaluate what are their motivation behind that. Now, one of the things that I've said now several times this morning is it's a way out of an unbearable situation. Now, but there might also be a wish to gain attention. There might be to effect a change in interpersonal relationship. Now, for example, a relationship that break up. To rejoin a dead relative, I've referred to that, to avoid an intolerable situation or revenge. And sometimes when there's the theme of revenge, that they might use a lot of violence in that. I've seen that with adults. If these motivations have not been satisfied by the time of the evaluation, serious suicidal intent might still be present. In other words, they didn't get the attention that they need, so that need wasn't satisfied. The relationship is still broke up. There's still a breakup, or the boyfriend or girlfriend still refused to talk to them. Well, obviously, the dead relative can't happen to rejoin. The intolerable situation at home is still like that. So sometimes that is where our intervention have to focus on. And sometimes it literally means that a child, I've had kids that are seriously suicidal. And then once they've admitted in the psychiatric hospital, within 2 days, they are radically better. And I mean, it can't be the medication that works so quick. So it is most frequently being out of an unbearable situation. Yeah, so, but how much is this still present now? Okay, the children should be hospitalized if an unstable condition makes the behavior unpredictable. So the psychiatrist will decide about that. But we don't have enough resources. We don't have enough psychiatrists. The other day, I wanted to refer an adult person, and the first open space that I could get was from now is 1st July. So then the only other option is to handle it as an emergency now in intake at casualties. Okay, look at the inability to form a therapeutic relationship. Look at the lack of truthfulness. So if you feel like a child is prone to tell a lack of lies, look at the inability to discuss or regulate emotional behavior. If a child is already on the brink of psychosis or psychotic, one of the primary school kids that I see from children's home, she started saying that there's a voice inside that tell her to kill herself. Current intoxications from alcohol or drugs, multiple serious previous self-death attempts. So one of my clients said to me once, she was just a young adult, with borderline and bipolar. Now, I mean, that is even worse to have both of that. But she said, I refuse to feel like this for the rest of my life, if I'm going to feel like this for the rest of my life, for the next 50 years, I tell you, I am going to kill myself. And then psychoeducation to the parents. This is often, if parents are caring and good enough, that is often also very traumatizing to them to hear this. So, identify changes in the mental state. So they need to be the first in line to identify the changes in the mental state of the child and to reduce the extent of the expressed emotion. So, when the child reduces the extent, so children stop talking and they don't want to say what's bothering them, and they are either passive aggressive or withdrawing. Although I find that parents often, even with the behavior, don't realize that the child is depressed, don't know the signs, don't care, or become angry and persecute the child for like I said, now, are you going to do this or that? Or what do you think I should do about it? Or now I have to pay 20,000 Rand to get you admitted in a hospital and stuff like that. So, yeah, there are parents that are the contributing factor and that will not be in the position to support a child. And those kids will need much more support from the therapist. All right, let's take our most needed tea break, and then we will go on and do the last part at 11. Welcome back, everyone. Okay, so we still have a little bit to do here, and then we're going to talk about ego strength and ethics around that. So, postvention is just referring to if there has been a self-death. Now, relative friends, teachers, and family members might obviously need intervention to facilitate grieving, to reduce guilt and depression, and decrease the effects of guilt and trauma. And I actually have a book here that a mother has written after her daughter committed self-death. And oh, it was hard for me even to read that. I think it's just a horrible thing that can happen to any person, to lose someone close to them through this way. And then intervention to minimize the risk of copycat self-deaths and the risk for these people around this person to develop anxiety, depression, and PTSD. Obviously, witnessing or viewing a scene afterwards increase the risk for PTSD and secondary trauma, even just hearing how it was or how it looked or stuff like that. And long-term support is necessary because the effect of this on others are absolutely far-reaching. Now, I think you know that. And we want to try. I think our work is just to really, really try to reduce that as far as possible. In terms of picking it up early enough that we can organize the helpful kits that they need, in terms of feeling better and having a better mood and getting psychiatric help, getting practical help, and getting therapeutic help. Okay, why I've put in a little part here about assessing children's ego strength, you might find it funny in terms of a lecture about ethics, is that we've said quite a bit of times that it is unethical. Now, I also said it this morning, to push a child to where a child is not ready. And I thought I would just put in, it's actually a little piece that I also have in my SAND training, but I just wanted to put in some interesting stuff around how can we see in our work more in terms of therapy and therapeutic interventions when a child has an overwhelmed ego. So just a short part about that for sake of interest. So here is an example, for example, of, you remember I said earlier the week that the house is a symbol of the ego. So, for example, burying a house can often show, burying a house under the sand can often be a sign of an overwhelmed ego. So there was a child that buried a house plus burying weapons, which actually showed aggression that was piling up and turned inward towards the ego, inward towards the self. Then if a child that is beyond the age of the development of object consciency, in other words, 4 years and older, that still plays a lot of hide and seek. One of my students is having a child that's already at school age, and every time that he comes into the therapy room, he goes to the sandbox and plays hide and seek. And often the hide and seek is, in a sense, like in front of your eyes. You look at where the child is hiding the thing and they take it out, or you have to take it out and they hide that. But this normally shows to a child that have trouble maintaining a constant mental image of a caregiver, and the basic question of object consciency. Or, for example, the whole family was engulfed into an earthquake. The whole thing of using the sand as quicksand, and something is, like drawn into the quicksand. So what kids would play out is they would, for example, bury the house or whatever is sucked in by the quicksand. So it's like it's symbolic of the unconscious. Now that is the ego that is not strong enough to withstand all the things that are bottled up in the unconscious, and the power of that is drawing the ego or weakening the ego or overwhelming the ego, and that can bring the child on the brink of psychosis and neurosis. We're going to look just at a photo too of a crowding tray. So again, not for young kids 2 and 3 years old, because they just play in this way, but for older kids might indicate anxiety and obsessive defenses. And then I also referred to a child that can't even start, for example, building a story in a sand tray, because the mere fact of that is overwhelming. Okay, so here you can see an example of an overwhelmed ego. So just to tell the story here, it's a child that struggle more and more, child grade 1 or 2, struggle more and more to go to school, drop out from extramural activities, have separation anxiety, don't want to go to school. And then in the sand scene, this red that you can see there is a man. And the story was that the man was living in the house and he put up a fence so that all these wild animals, which is a symbol of our aggressive instincts, cannot come and hurt the man. You can see there's a snake also, and a crocodile, and a lioness, and an elephant, and a bear, and a bat. And then what happened, the man went outside, and all the wild animals came and they destroyed the fence and they killed the man. Right, so I mean, that will be an example of a child with a totally overwhelmed ego, and therefore this will be a child that I will definitely not go to painful or traumatic stuff, and we'll make sure what can we do, what does this child need in the immediate moment that we can produce the anxiety or the stress source, or what is leading to that stress source. But I just wanted to show the example to show that this is an example of being totally flooded by powers in the unconscious. Okay, so in terms of an overwhelmed ego, the structure, organization, clarity, fluidity, and relational qualities that are between different miniatures in the sand tray are absent. Often the sand tray look like a much younger child's tray. Sometimes the ego, I've referred to that earlier this week, is so overwhelmed that the child cannot decide, that walks up and down, up and down, up and down, and cannot decide what to do, cannot pick even one miniature. Then any amount of chaos shows a poor ego structure. Then there's a difference between an overwhelmed ego and just lower ego strength. Now, so a lower ego strength is like when there are a specific stressors, and like I said earlier the week, all of us our ego strength is lowered when we are exposed to stress, like you are moving to another city, or you start a new work, or one of your parents are terminally ill, whatever. And the same with kids now. So, or for example, for a child, when parents are divorcing, and we need to distinguish low ego strength from a negativized ego, because a negativized ego is where wounding took place before ego development. The traumatic wounding took place before the age of around about 3.5, and then there was no container now, and therefore the trauma is stored very deeply in the unconscious and stored there with rigid defenses, and therefore it's more difficult, and like it will take much longer time of therapy, and the child will not be able to verbalize about that. If children make projections in our therapy room through drawings or paintings or sand ray, we must be very careful to prematurely make interpretations. Now, so to ask that kind of what we do in the Gestalt, can it be questions? Now, the child draw a story, and there's a threat there, and you ask, can it be that in your life you also feel like that? And I handle this quite properly and extensively in my play therapy courses. But what I want to say is that we really need to be careful not to expect the child to own a projection before we have not worked to strengthen their ego, more so with traumatized children. With traumatized children, it's not just strengthening the ego. Part of strengthening the ego is also that whole phase that you spent such a lot of time yesterday on, establishing safety. Safety, ways to get safety, ways to better co-regulate, not to be in constant, disarousal or arousal state where we are hyper or hyper vigilant, and having a stronger ego is a prerequisite before we even expect from a child to own what they have projected. Okay, Kaylee asks, could a child who cannot stay focused on one toy activity and moves around from one thing to another for the whole set? It can. I mean, it can be in the first session. It is often a theme of exploration, because the child's just very excited to, like, what's this and what's this and what's that. So if it's not the first session, then we need to look at the distractibility of a possible ADHD. But if it's not that, then it can be a definite sign of poor contact making. In other words, my anxiety is too much and I can't connect with the symbolism of this long enough, because my ego strength is low, or my ego is overwhelmed. Now, which link up to anxiety, and which say that I need first to experience safety and stronger ego. So sometimes it even works to take the child out of the environment of the playroom and pick one thing in a neutral kind of environment, like an office environment or outside, or whatever is needed to focus on. So to see if you can't get the child to make better contact, if he can jump on the trampoline or doing something like that. Okay, just in terms of the development of the ego, when children reach school age, the phase of building up the ego and adapting to the outer world begins. So ego development starts at around about age 3.5, but then, I mean, it goes on and it goes through different phases. But when children reach school age and sometimes preschool, when they start to go out into the world, that requires that you need to adapt to how other people respond towards you and stuff like that. And this sometimes bring painful shocks to the child. Because, I mean, like, a child that is in a good enough environment of a parental home is quite protected. So some children might then realize that they are very different from other kids, even if they are struggling, having a learning disorder, learning disability, a physical disability, autism, and that can bring a lot of loneliness and sadness. And the other thing is, simultaneously, they have to need to learn to cope with the inner impulses, more so our traumatized kids that struggle with emotional regulation, as well as the demands of the outside world. Now, yesterday we discussed that, how to go back to normal life, how to adapt to normative standards and cope with trauma symptoms. It's a very difficult task for the kids that we've discussed this week. If the development of consciousness is disturbed in the normal unfolding, children retire from the inner and outer difficulties into an inner fortress, and that is the self-care system that I've discussed earlier this week with the regress part and the progress part and the inner protector and the inner persecutor. Okay, examples when assessing ego strength. So, unremembered events may appear in the form of repetition and repetitious enactments with others that repeat relational patterns of the original situation. So, even if it is stored in the right brain, in the implicit memory of the limbic system, children are still able to play it out. And often, if it is trauma, we get repetitive play. If there's a primitive rage, can be a threat to the developing ego. So the sand tray can trigger unspoken primal rage, which is overwhelming. Why? Because touching the sand and playing in the sand brings, and I don't know why it's like that. Well, I think sand is bringing you close to earth. But, and then the symbols of the miniatures, that also is a projection of what you feel inside. So there's a part of that will always stay a mystery. But what I can see, I have seen it. I have seen how working in sand can bring a child into contact with very early pre-verbal type of rage that the child himself obviously won't understand. But they can come into contact with that now and start throwing the sand or having a lot of muddy and messy play, or playing out whatever other form of, take a volcano and fill it up with very muddy, wet sand and try to, you know, illustrate or play out how the lava is exploding out of the volcano. Intrusion, this one is quite interesting. Intrusion of unconscious material can take place because of a deep psychological wound. So it's almost like, now let me make my little drawing again. So if you have this as the basement, this is the house board, and this is the roof. And so what happens because of early childhood wounding and the ego that wasn't formed well is that it's almost like there's a leak between the boundary between the unconscious and the conscious, and the images, the things that the child dream about and play out, and you will see a lot of archetypal type of image of things in the center of a child come from the deepest unconscious, but it floods the ego. It absolutely overwhelms the ego. So you will find a sand tray that is full of archetypal figures out of the Greek mythology, you know, werewolves and dragons and dinosaurs and all kinds of that kind of, I almost want to say not real figures, but powers, I almost want to say, that flood the ego of the child, that the child definitely themselves also cannot understand. Then rage, self-hatred, and aggression. Okay, so a child that buries a house often shows, like I've said, an overwhelmed ego in a demoralized state. The weapons, it means that tremendous rage, self-hatred, and aggression is forced back into the unconscious. So what will it do in the unconscious? It will build up energy there as a volcano, and then from time to time flood the conscious of the child. The work of therapy is to help the ego to become strong enough so all these piled up stuff in the unconscious can come out little bits by little bits, to reduce the flooding power of it. Here is an example of a sand scene of a child with an overwhelmed ego. It's a very simplified sand scene, but you can see that the snake is an absolute threat to the eggs. So what was the story of the sand tray? So there was a 7-year-old child that built the sand tray with a snake wiggling towards a bird's nest that contains unprotected eggs. So there's no mother figure. Now, the symbolism of eggs is that it can carry hidden potential, and the trees and bushes, in other words, the forest, means that we are in the unconscious. So this was a child that was very much dominated by an overbearing mother. You remember I mentioned that a child between age 2 and 4 need to turn away from the mother and start identifying with the father. But the boy couldn't do that because her mum was overbearing and she was critical of the boy's masculine interest. So that normal separation from a son from a mother didn't take place. And on top of that, the father was absent. So there was no father figure to turn to, and therefore the boy had no help with his individuation. And this is how it played out, how the boy showed that. Now, in my Sandro workshop, I mean, I go much deeper in this and symbolism and what things can mean and so. So if you're interested in that, consider that workshop. All right, the overwhelmed ego, when the tray is overfilled, when it appears chaotic, it might point to a high level of anxiety, a psychic threat and attack. It's like a psychological splitting that a child experiences. Crowding might sometimes also take place in intellectually disabled children, low intelligence, children with high levels of uncontrolled anxiety and obsessive manic defenses. Here is an example of a crowded tray. Now, I mean, like you can definitely also see this in a child with untreated ADHD. So I think we all know what kids with ADHD do now is they take they empty the baskets in the sand tray and just throw it in a chaotic heap and run to the next thing. But this was not a hyperactive child. This was a child that had a chaotic inside. And this was a way to show that. I mean, like, this is how it was. Then also look out for overcrowding with nice objects. So sometimes, you know, like when something looks too good to be true, it is too good to be true. So this is a child, then if it goes on and on and on, and it's only nice objects, although the child comes from a traumatized environment or so, it's literally that the child doesn't have the ego strength to integrate the shadow parts, the dark, scary objects that's also part of the inside or that's stored in the unconscious. So it's a child that makes everything looks overly pretty. Now, their own sadistic energy is forced back in the unconscious and split off from this nice part in the conscious. So anxiety is seen by the tendency to overcrowd the sand tray with nice toys and shut down the dark, aggressive, sadistic objects, especially of a child that has a history of abuse or has reason to have a lot of suppressed anger. All right, here is a sand tray that, although it's not so overcrowded as the chaotic tray that I've showed, it's a child that have a lot of you know, abusive incidents in the past and so. But the sand trays kept on just having this nice type of scenes now in terms of caring, mother-child unity there, which was so not part of the child's life. And here you can see different people taking care of animals and horses that have food and so. So, I mean, like, it's a type of tray that you would we'd rather see at the end of a sand tray process where a child is I just want to say ready for termination. Now we call it a marketplace scene, but not if you get initially in the process, keep on getting that. Now, that is actually a defense. It's not reality. Okay, so more examples when assessing ego strength: disorganized traits. When a child's threatened by the contents of their inner world, it's often easier to follow the path of least resistance and create banal pictures that reflects the outer world. So also, if they push everything under the world, and the sand tray world is very dark and monstrous, objects that fight and then burying them under the sand, and the child tells a story that they are continuing fighting under the sand. So what it actually show is the ego is regressed, and the regressed ego is continuously overwhelmed. So in a sense now, it refers to if an ego is constantly overwhelmed, we also need to consider, in terms of the overall assessment of a child, does the child need also maybe medication for anxiety, and what in the environment lead to the constant overwhelm, which might be living in an abusive, dysfunctional, neglectful environment. Awkward placement of figures. I'm going to show you an example, or where's, for example, no interaction between figures. All figures are facing forward. So here is an example of very poor ego strength. So what you can see is there's no relation between the different objects. I mean, like this is pointing there, there's a tractor and a pot of gold and a man, Wreck-It Ralph, lying on his face, defeated. The scene is very empty. Here is an army tank full of sand, and yeah, it doesn't make sense now, and it's empty and barren, and the different miniatures is not connected with each other in a meaningful relationship. Here is an example of figures that are all placing forward. Now, so a child start, you ask them to build a sand story, and they start and take a figure, and they just put them in one after another in rows. Okay, here is a primitive humor finger drawing of a 6-year-old child that also shows developmental deficiencies and problems with ego strength. Here is an example of repetitive post-traumatic play, where, remember, we talked about repetition compulsion. So the compulsion to repeat scenes of violence. So what was interesting here is it's a boy, a scene of a boy, and you can see that the Eiffel Towers, which is a phallic symbol, a masculine symbol, as well as the Big Ben, there's one standing and that's still protected, but most of them are destroyed. And every week the child plays out the same type of story. So in my advanced play therapy course, I do a part on when and how do we intervene in repetitive post-traumatic play. Another way to see poor ego strength is a rigid fenced world without gates. So what is interesting to see here is the child played in 2 sand scenes. This is all the negative mothers. Now there is with the Medusa, the snake-headed woman, and the Snow White witch, and 2 other witches. They are fenced in. In other words, there's not a gate. Now it's cut off from it's a part in the unconscious, the negative mother complex, that is surrounded by the fences and cut off from conscious world. And then what needed to be protected, you can see here is the Rapunzel castle, but even in the castle there has been a lot of people with guns and stuff that access the fences. Now, so don't come close here, there's pain. And then there's a prison and another castle to act as a defense. So the implication, just for sake of interest, of when we have fenced worlds without a gate, is that the energy of this will build up in the unconscious and flood and erupt like a volcano. Now, because I mean, like, I almost want to say they don't like to be cut off like that. And it also shows a bit what we've talked earlier this week about compartmentalization. So the experience of female figures from young that acted as negative mothers is now organized around a negative mother complex in the unconscious, where it keep on harassing the child, sometimes creating a death wish, sometimes acting as a deaf mother, judging the child, blaming the child for everything that goes wrong. And the fact that the child had to put up so many defenses now for it to be able not to enter here, even up to there, now shows the rigid defenses. Here's another example of rigid defenses. So this was a sad scene of a teenage girl that started to having a lot of panic attacks because of too much pressure to perform at school. What is interesting here is that she took a double fence. These were all the scary material, all the threats, and double fence to really make sure that they cannot escape. But now what happens? She gets panic attacks because the anxiety is suppressed to such an extent now that it keep on exploding. Okay, so this is the positive side. That's the threatening side. The positive side, they are cut off from each other. And there's also a barricade. Okay, then an attack on a dollhouse. So a house can be a symbol of the ego or the mother. And there was a child that played out an attack on a dollhouse chimney with a mop and a broom. And this was followed by stuffing the interior of the house with furniture. Outside the house was a witch that wanted to enter the dollhouse and destroy it. The people inside could not keep the witch out, and she killed everyone. So that is a clear symbol of poor ego strength, and again being overwhelmed by the negative mother complex, because the witch is a symbol of a negative mother. Okay, we talked about hide and seek, whole family engulfed in an earthquake. Then dynamic or interactive play, especially in the sand tray, where the child don't just build a picture, but play out a story. So the characters in the sand tray move, and the child saying, then this happened, and then that happened, and so is not common to see in a 12-year-old child anymore. So if you have a 12-year-old and older child, for example, that still do that, there is a clear regress part in that child. Any type of theme of drowning, for example, the Rapunzel girl is drowned by the witch mother. Now, so I mean, like, it's quite a serious sign of being overwhelmed and engulfed by the negative mother. Drowning, because the water is unconscious or going down, like is going into the unconscious, the ocean, the sea is also the unconscious. So drowning, any symbol of drowning, any theme of drowning can be a symbol of the loss of the ego in the ocean of the unconscious. In other words, the ego is sucked in like a quicksand. And I mean, like the moment that happened, the ego cannot contain anything that come up anymore. Here is an example of a child that played hide and seek for 45 minutes. He would hide this yolk of the egg. I had to seek it, he would hide it, I had to seek it. And this is also a symbol of the beginning of life. The boy was 5 years old, and it was very clear that his development in terms of object constancy was behind. Another symbol of low ego strength. So you can see there are treasure boxes that carry treasures, and all of these are, the good guys are killed, and then the treasures are under serious threat. Here is a drawing of a child with low ego strength after a parent's divorce, teenager. So we can again see the thing of being cut off. Now, the compartmentalization. So here's my dad, I cannot connect with him. Here's my mom and my grandmother, they are drinking tea, they don't mind about me. And here's my sister, and then the color black. No, the sadness. So I mean, this would also count for suicidality, and which was prevalent here, extreme depression, because everyone is enjoying their life, everyone is going on well, everyone is happy, no one care about me, I'm totally alone, which is not always the reality of the situation, but this is how the child feels. And we know now that part of depression is also the distorted perceptions, now that no one loves me and all of that, and low self-esteem. This is where I did the rose bush projection with a child, a teenager, and she, when children project themselves in the desert, either in the sand tray or in a drawing, I've never seen that there was not a sign of depression. So she's standing in a desert. Now imagine yourself as a rose bush, and then questions, where are you standing? How are you looking? Do you have fruits? Do you have thorns? Do you have roses? Who's taking care of you? So there's no roses, standing in a desert, all alone, which is also a sign of depression. And then, I mean, we can see the absolute dark clouds, and she said that there's a, a thunderstorm. So normally rain can be a source of care, like taking care of a plant or a tree, but not when it looks like this, and definitely not when a child say that it is no, I would ask the kids sometimes, especially the younger ones, do you think this rain can take care of the rose bush, or do you think the rain is too hard? It's like a storm that can damage the rose bush. Okay, and then examples of more stable age-appropriate ego function. So ego strength is evident. Like I said earlier, if there's organized, relational, and well-defined story in the sand tray, and there, for example, a child was planting a flag on a mountain in the sand tray. The mount or mountain is often a sign of the Mother Earth, or the womb or the breast. And a flag is to say, here am I. I'm existing. Or a handprint. So that would be a sign of having enough ego strength to do the work. Here is a beautiful example of a sand tray of a child that went through quite a bit of therapy. Initially also was standing in a desert for quite a long time. And through the therapy process, stuff is so much better. And look here, there's a crystal and a waterfall and a river and a journey. Now, a journey that is indicated through pathways is a symbol of healing and transformation. It's not a symbol of wounding. So we do get themes of wounding and themes of transformation. And look at this wonderful panda bear family there, and a lot of nourishment for them as well. Here's another one. So bridges are symbols of transition, of transcendence, and of reconciliation. And it's almost like life is normal. There's a car and a house and a bridge and a telephone. And yeah, we don't know where this bridge and the road are pointing to, but that's a stable ego. Now, here is an interesting one, also a stable ego, although we see that there's still a defense in place. So this side is a nourishing side. There's food available. There's a bridge. There are trees and roses and a house and Eiffel Tower. So it's a scene of a boy. Here, in terms of maybe the forest, maybe the what do I need to access to bear fruit in my life? Now, how can I access the fruit tree? And then there's a clock that's ticking. So more referring to the unconscious part. There is a bridge now. So there's a possibility to bridge from the stability of the ego to the unconscious, but something is still in the way. But the work can be done because there are enough resources in place. The bigger part of the sand tray has resources. All right, so the message out of that is the message of take care of the child's ego strength in terms of, acting ethically and not pushing a child where they can't go. We don't want to re-traumatize children or drive them towards dissociation and psychosis and so. Right. So this brings me to the last part of our week, where I just want to say a few things about self-care, and I also want us to do a little grounding exercise in the group for ourselves. And after that, I'm gonna just give you each one also the opportunity to say your last words of what you want to say about what you've experienced this week. So I think I would be surprised if you are not tired after this week, because we've done really, really heavy work. Treating and caring for victims of acute and post-traumatic stress disorder and acute stress disorder is wearing, tiring, and sometimes painful, and can really lead to compassion fatigue. Hearing children's stories and being aware of their history and critical incidents and are they okay, can impact our daily well-being, because we carry a big responsibility for these kids. Now, it's not like when you close your office door that it's so easy just to close off your thoughts about a specific child or situation or more than one. So beyond just compassion fatigue, and I mean, we also, the signs of burnout. Now, I do work sometimes with burnout in professionals. It's a reality for all of us. You need to take care and to see the early warning signs of that. So that I've recently worked with someone that she had the early signs of stop sleeping well, can't switch off anymore, feels she's not coping at work, trying to be more and more perfectionistic. And then what happened in the end is she just totally collapsed. And to an extent now that her brain could not, I mean, she totally stopped sleeping and stuff like that. So burnout can really create severe damage, and we need to look out for signs of post-traumatic stress disorder in ourselves as well. The secondary traumatization, especially if something really bad happened, like a child committing self-death or stuff like that. Now, the things that we work with, all the continuous exposure to these traumatic stories. So we need to do frequent self-checks for signs and symptoms of PTSD, burnout, and compassion fatigue in ourselves. It's our responsibility as adults to take remedial measures for this. Every contact with a stress disorder child should be debriefed in your mind, and that can be done in your mind. It can be done by building a sand tray about it, or obviously all the other self-care practices, and also to see your own therapist, I think, which is one of the most important. So when you try to debrief yourself, and sometimes it's so difficult in our environments now, because when the one case leaves, the next one come in, and there's 3 other emergencies waiting, and we don't always have time to work through our own emotions. So, but we have to not just review the content of the session, but also, why do I feel, how do I feel about this, and why do I feel what I feel? Like I said earlier, now we also have a window of tolerance. We also can become hypervigilant, and we also can become numb. So when you start to pick up numbness in yourself, you know that you are in hypoarousal. And it's your psyche's and body's way to protect yourself, but it's a sign, it's a serious sign, because you know, I mean, like, it means that you that care too much or have cared so much now that have to suppress all of that and go into numbness. And I see that a lot in doctors, medical students and doctors that really sometimes have to work extremely long hours and just deal with one emergency after the other. Now, that numbness. So we are human beings, and it's not just possible to turn off a switch after a session. sometimes we think we have done that, but we haven't. No. And some things that I've picked up in myself, for example, is I was working with a very difficult, I think she had psychopathic traits, the mother, but I could pick up that she's dangerous. And then one night while I was in the therapy process with, it was about a child that she was emotionally abusing. I literally dreamt that she came and killed me. So, I mean, like, obviously I picked up maybe on the evil, but I also, my unconscious was very much busy with her and her effect. Okay, so that thing of just try to forget about it and move on to the next task. It's these things don't just go away. So take note of your dreams, and take note of your symptoms. So on the one hand, we are taught to keep a distance from the client for reasons such as to be more effective and remain objective and to control transference and counter-transference. But the brutal truth is when the client is a young child and the work has to do with abuse, it is really much more difficult to maintain this space, to an extent sometimes really impossible. So remember that you were attracted to this work in the first place because you are empathetic, to sometimes to the extent of being an empath. I think there are a lot of therapists who are empaths, but that makes it so much more difficult to get a safe distance between yourself and the work. It makes us more vulnerable to catch the child's pain. And one of the skills that we need to develop in order to practice self-care is the whole thing of differentiation and depersonalization, not to lose ourselves and our own ego while working with someone else. So the space that we need to keep is healthy differentiation, and the better your own ego strength, the better you will be able to do that. The more strain and stress you have in your own life, the more difficult it will be. So differentiation then also refers to own your own emotions, to being able to avoid being overwhelmed by your own emotions, as well as the emotions of those we have close emotional contact with. So as far as possible to stay in our own window of tolerance and in our own social engagement system. And what we talked about yesterday, when we talked about, just as a teacher sometimes need to call in, to WhatsApp and text someone and say, I need some help, I need some time out of my class. We as therapists also sometimes need time out and need to take that breaks. Counseling abuse children is both intimate and overwhelming, and we need skills and work on our own skills to regulate ourselves in highly charged emotional situations with others. So a higher level of differentiation is something that I think we learn, we develop as we grow, and more specifically through our supervision. Because supervision is a safe space where you can reflect your true feelings, not just what happened in a session or what you worried or what you wonder about what to do with a client, but also how did you feel in the process and what is the roots of those, what are the roots of those feelings. It helps with self-insight, it helps with laying it down and just, like talking around that. Now, it's like a combination between your therapy and also get guidance for your own cases. So it doesn't mean that you cold and unfeeling. It can allow you to experience and feel emotions more accurately. So for us, it's also then that same rules that count for the teachers that we have done, not to be reactive, but responsive. Self-debriefing, it really helps. If I'm very if something upset me very much, or a client, a parent of a child triggers my buttons, I will go to my therapy room, and when I have time, and I will build a sand tray of how I feel. And if I feel very angry, I will build that anger, and I will pick a miniature of what the parent remind me of, or what is triggered in me. And I might take a photograph and I might take that to my own therapist or supervisor and just work out, okay, but where does this come from? Now, why is it that this specific thing is so triggering? So, and during that post-session sitting with the feelings or meditation, we can also allow ourselves to be sad, to cry, to experience the pain, the fear, the anger, the rage, and the confusion. Sometimes they are really, they say if professionals start to fight with each other about a client or, different systems, people in a system look out for a personality disorder. So sometimes there's confusion now that we don't understand what's going on here. We don't understand. We don't know, like in divorce cases, you see the mother and she tells you a lot of stuff about the father. And then you see the father and you're like, you don't see this stuff, like, and the father tell a different story. Now, who do you believe? Who's right? Who's lying? Who's carrying a false self? And so. All right, so build a stand story of the feelings and sit with the feelings, be mindful of it. We might dream about it, and the dreams might be your unconscious that try to process the emotions, which is a very normal thing. If you keep on dreaming about a situation that you work with, you might need to enhance your self-care and also take that dream to a therapist. And then I think support of colleagues, depending on your own situation. If you work in private practice, that's, on your own, then you're very much on your own. But if you work in a system, what's so sad sometimes is in systems where people are supposed to support each other, there you get the most strain from. But sometimes it helps now just to process with someone. Your own private support system, sometimes they can see that you are not okay when you can't see it or you still have a blind spot. And then all the other strategies that we know of but often don't do. I can find myself really having sugar crushes if I've worked too hard or upset or struggle to fall asleep at night. So getting enough sleep, exercise, stay important for us. It doesn't matter what our situation. And then taking complete breaks. I think that's an important one now, that when you really take that break, to take that break now. So not to be halfway away and halfway still involved with clients, or because sometimes we can struggle to get our mind to switch off. And I think in the therapeutic field, it is really important to take a short break at least every 6 weeks, even if it's just a weekend away. And then, to take a proper break at least every 3 months, according to what your leave allowance. So, but I mean, there's no other way. You need to get totally out of the situation and get to yourself. Because when we're a therapist, specifically a therapist, but it also goes for teachers now, and but in terms of the therapist now, there's part of you that in your role cannot have a normal life, if you understand what I mean. I mean, if you go to the shopping center, if you're in a small town or not even, and you see someone there that's a client, you're not allowed to greet that person. Nah, I mean, like they might greet you, or like in the lift tell you, oh, my child's so much better in front of other kids. But you kind of almost like, the way in which people look at you is as if you have everything together. You don't ever have any personal problems of your own, like, because you're a therapist. That means if you help other people, your life is almost perfect, which is absolutely not true. No. But the fact is that, so sometimes to get out of that, you kind of almost, I want to say, need to get out of town now, to get to a place where you can be you now without having to cope and to show that coping, and like all that go with that.